The graduation party was supposed to be the highlight of my daughter's life, but the moment she raised her glass, my mother smiled coldly and dropped a sentence like a knife onto the table. Telling me to start paying rent tomorrow. The whole room went silent because everyone knew I was a freeloader. There was just one small problem. That house never belonged to her, and I had been waiting for this exact moment to open my briefcase. My name is Brooke Martin, and for the last 16 years, I have perfected the art of becoming invisible in a room full of people who share my DNA. I learned a long time ago that if I remained quiet enough, if I occupied the least amount of space possible, I could sometimes avoid the sharp edges of my mother's tongue, but tonight was not supposed to be about me, nor was it supposed to be about my mother, Marianne. Tonight was supposed to be about Haley. We were seated in the private dining room of the Oak and Vine, one of the most upscale steakhouses in Raleigh, North Carolina. The walls were lined with dark mahogany, and the lighting was dim and amber, designed to make everyone look wealthy and relaxed. It was the kind of place where the menu did not list prices for the specials, and the waiters moved with a silent, practiced efficiency. The air smelled of expensive red wine, seared beef, and the heavy floral perfume my Aunt Linda always wore too much of. I sat in the middle of the long table, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, watching my daughter. Haley looked radiant. She was wearing a navy blue dress that fit her perfectly, modest but elegant, and around her neck hung the gold and braided cords that screamed success to anyone who looked at them. Graduating with honors, a full scholarship to a graduate program in biomedical engineering. She was everything I had prayed she would be, and so much more. She was kind, she was brilliant, and she had worked harder than any 22-year-old I had ever known. Across the table, my cousin Mike was standing up, holding his phone high to get a panoramic shot of the table. "Smile, everyone," Mike shouted, his voice booming a little too loudly for the hushed atmosphere of the restaurant. "Let us get a picture of the genius before she runs off to save the world and forgets about us little people." Everyone laughed. It was that warm, performative laughter that families do so well at gatherings. My father, Douglas Holt, offered a weak smile, but his eyes barely left the screen of his phone. He had been checking it every 3 minutes since we arrived. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders hunched in his gray suit, nervously tapping his thumb against the side of the device. He looked like a man waiting for bad news, or perhaps trying to ignore the bad news sitting right next to him. Marianne Holt, my mother. She sat at the head of the table. Naturally, she was wearing a cream-colored blazer that I knew cost more than my first car, and her silver hair was coiffed into an immovable helmet of perfection. She was not smiling, while everyone else was fawning over Haley, touching her arm, asking to see her diploma cover. Marianne just watched. Her eyes were dry and sharp, darting around the table, cataloging every movement, every laugh, every sip of wine. She looked like a predator waiting for the wind to shift. I took a sip of water, trying to wash down the lump of anxiety in my throat. I told myself I was being paranoid. This was Haley's night. Marianne would not ruin this. She cared too much about appearances. There were too many witnesses here, too many aunts and uncles and cousins who needed to believe that the Holts were the perfect American family. She would behave. She had to. "So, Haley, tell us again about the program," Aunt Linda chirped, leaning over her half-eaten salad. "Is it true they are paying for everything? Even your housing?" Haley beamed, her face flushing slightly with modest pride. She put down her fork and nodded. "Yes, Aunt Linda. It is fully funded. The grant covers tuition and a living stipend because I will be working as a research assistant in the lab, and I am keeping my part-time job at the university library on weekends just for extra savings." A collective murmur of approval went around the table. "That is incredible," Uncle Bob said, shaking his head. "Kids these days usually graduate with a mountain of debt. You are starting at zero. That is a head start most people would kill for. It is smart," Linda added. "That is just plain smart. You have got a good head on your shoulders." "Honey, I felt a swell of pride so intense it almost brought tears to my eyes. I wanted to reach out and squeeze Haley's hand, to tell her how awe-inspiring she was. I wanted to tell the table about the nights she stayed up until 3 in the morning studying organic chemistry, or the way she budgeted every single cent she earned from shelving books at the library, so she would never have to ask anyone for money. I wanted to claim her success, not as my own, but as something I had nurtured. But before I could open my mouth, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "It is the bloodline." A voice cut through the chatter. It was calm, authoritative, and chilling. The table went quiet. We all turned to look at the head of the table. Marianne was dabbing the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin, not looking at anyone in particular. She set the napkin down with deliberate slowness. "Excuse me, Grandma?" Haley asked, her smile faltering just a fraction. Marianne turned her gaze to Haley. It was a look that mimicked affection but lacked any actual warmth. I said, "It is the bloodline, Haley. You get that intelligence from the Holt side of the family. Your grandfather and I, we have always valued intellect. We have always valued hard work. It is in your DNA. It is only natural that you would succeed. You are a Holt. After all." I felt my stomach twist. It was a classic Marianne move. She was claiming ownership of Haley's achievements, wrapping them up in her own ego, but I could handle that. I was used to her erasing me. As long as she was praising Haley, I could bite my tongue. "That is very kind of you to say." "Mom," I said, my voice sounding thin in the quiet room. I tried to keep the peace. "Haley has certainly worked very hard." Marianne's head snapped toward me. The movement was so sudden, so precise, that it felt like a physical slap. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time all evening, the mask of the doting grandmother slipped completely. Beneath it was pure, unadulterated disdain. "Working hard is the bare minimum. Brooke," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. The clinking of silverware stopped. The waiters, sensing the tension, paused in the shadows. I held her gaze, refusing to look away. Though every instinct in my body screamed at me to retreat, I worked hard too. I said softly. Marianne let out a short, dry laugh. It was a cruel sound. "Did you?" she asked. She picked up her wineglass, swirled the red liquid around, and looked at it as if reading a fortune. "You are over 40 years old. Brooke, you have a degree that gathers dust. You have spent the last 16 years living under my roof, eating my food, using my electricity." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I could feel the eyes of my relatives burning into the side of my face. They all knew the narrative. They all knew the story Marianne had spun for nearly 2 decades. Poor Brooke. Failed Brooke. The one who got pregnant young, messed up her life, and had to crawl back to Mommy and Daddy. "Mom!" "Not now," I whispered. "Please. This is Haley's graduation dinner. This is exactly the time," Marianne said, her voice sharpening. She set the glass down hard enough that the stem rattled against the table base. "Because we are talking about success. We are talking about the future. Haley is moving on. She is launching her life. She is becoming a productive member of society." She paused, letting the silence stretch out until it was unbearable. "And then there is you." Aunt Linda looked uncomfortable. "Marianne, maybe we should save this for later," she suggested weakly. "Family business is discussed in front of family." Marianne snapped, not even looking at her sister. She kept her eyes fixed on me, pinning me to the chair. I looked at Douglas. "Dad?" I asked, pleading with my eyes. "Help me. Stop her." My father looked up from his phone for 1 second, met my eyes with a look of terrified apology, and then looked back down at his lap. He was not going to save me. He never had. Marianne leaned forward, her elbows on the table, invading my personal space from 10 feet away. "You know what the problem is, Brooke?" she said, her tone conversational, almost educational, as if she were explaining a simple math problem to a slow child. "You think that just because you are quiet, just because you help out with the dishes now and then, that you are contributing, But you are not. You are a drain. Mom, I started. Intelligence does not pay the bills, Marianne interrupted, dropping the sentence like a gavel. Intelligence does not pay the bills. Brooke, good intentions do not pay the mortgage. You sit there, looking so proud, acting like you had a hand in Haley's success. But let us be honest, you have been a child raising a child. And who paid for the roof over your heads while you played house? We did. Your father and I. Haley stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the wooden floor. Grandma, stop it, Haley said, her voice shaking. Do not talk to my mom like that. Not tonight. Sit down. Haley, Marianne commanded. She did not raise her voice, but the authority in it was absolute. This does not concern you. This is between me and your mother. It is a lesson she should have learned 20 years ago. Haley looked at me, her eyes wide with shock and hurt. I shook my head slightly, silently begging her to sit, to not engage. I did not want her dragging herself into the mud with Marianne. This was my burden. I took a deep breath and straightened my spine. Okay, Mom, I said, keeping my voice level, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. You have made your point. I am a disappointment. I have not achieved what you wanted me to achieve. Can we please just finish dinner? Marianne smiled. It was the smile of a chess player who sees checkmate 3 moves ahead. Oh, we can finish dinner, she said. But things are going to change. Haley is leaving. The nest is empty. And frankly, your father and I are tired. We are tired of carrying dead weight. She reached into her purse and pulled out a piece of paper. It looked like a napkin at first, but as she unfolded it, I saw it was a page from a legal pad, covered in her spiky, aggressive handwriting. I have done the math, Marianne announced, addressing the entire table now. She was performing. This was her moment. She was the martyr, the generous saint who had finally reached her breaking point. I have looked at the rental rates in our neighborhood. For a 3-bedroom house with a finished basement and a large yard, the going rate is quite high. She looked at me, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Starting tomorrow, you are going to start paying rent. Brooke, the room went so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen down the hall. Rent? I repeated, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. Yes, rent, Marianne said. Real rent. Not a token $100 here and there when you feel like it. I want market value. She looked at Douglas. Tell her the number. Douglas. My father cleared his throat. He looked like he wanted to dissolve into the upholstery. $3,100. He mumbled. I blinked. $3,100? That is the rate, Marianne said firmly. $3,100 a month, due on the 1st, starting tomorrow. But Mom, I said, trying to process the absurdity of it, I cannot. That is, if you cannot pay it. Then you can pack, Marianne said. She picked up her fork and stabbed a piece of steak, the metal screeching slightly against the china. You have until noon tomorrow to decide. Pay up or get out. It is time you learned what the real world costs. I looked around the table. Aunt Linda was staring at her plate. Uncle Bob was examining his wine glass. My cousins were looking at their phones. No one was going to speak up. No one was going to defend me. To them, this was harsh. Yes, but perhaps justified. After all, in their eyes, I was the 42-year-old failure living in my parents' house. I was the leech. Marianne was just finally salting me off her skin. I looked at Haley. She was pale, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She looked ready to scream, ready to flip the table. She opened her mouth to argue, to defend me, to tell them that this was insane. I caught her eye and gave her a sharp look. No, I did not want her to fight this. She did not know. No one knew. For 16 years. I had let them believe the lie. I had let them believe I was weak. I had let them believe I was poor. I had let them believe that Marianne and Douglas were the benevolent saviors keeping a roof over my head. I did it to keep the peace. I did it so Haley could grow up in a stable home, without knowing that her grandparents were financial disasters. I did it because I was a daughter who wanted to save her parents from the shame of bankruptcy. But Marianne had made a fatal error. She had mistaken my silence for submission. She had mistaken my kindness for weakness. And worst of all, she had chosen to do this tonight. She had chosen to stain Haley's greatest achievement with her petty cruelty. She wanted to humiliate me publicly? Fine. But she had forgotten one very important detail. The house did not belong to her. I reached down to the floor beside my chair. There, resting against the table leg, was my leather briefcase. It was battered and old, the kind of bag you bring to a business meeting, not a graduation dinner. When I brought it in, Marianne had sneered at it, asking why I was bringing trash into a nice restaurant. I lifted the briefcase onto my lap. The leather was cool under my fingers. The brass latches clicked loudly in the silence. It was a sound like a gun being cocked. Marianne stopped chewing. She looked at the briefcase, then at my face. For a split second, a flicker of confusion crossed her eyes. She did not know what was inside. She could not possibly know. She believed her own lies so fully that she had forgotten the truth existed. "What are you doing?" Marianne asked. Her voice tight. "Put that away. You're embarrassing yourself." I did not answer. I just looked at her. My heart had stopped racing. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I looked at my father, who was finally looking at me, his eyes wide with a sudden, dawning horror. He remembered. Douglas knew what was in the bag. I popped the latches. Click, click. The sound echoed in the room. "You want to talk about paying bills?" "Mom?" I asked softly. "You want to talk about who owns what?" I opened the lid. "Okay," I said. "Let us talk." Marianne looked at the open briefcase on my lap, and then she laughed. It was not a joyful sound. It was a sharp, barking noise that sounded more like a cough than anything resembling humor. She shook her head, looking around the table as if inviting everyone else to share in the joke. To witness the absurdity of her middle-aged daughter pulling out an old leather case at a fine dining establishment. "Is that supposed to be impressive?" she asked, gesturing vaguely at the stack of papers resting inside the leather interior. "What do you have in there? Brooke? Your diary? A list of your dreams? Or maybe it is a resume? If it is a resume, you're about 20 years too late to show it to me." She did not wait for an answer. She never did. Marianne thrived on momentum, on the sheer force of her own voice rolling over everyone else like a tide. She turned back to the table, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. She had drawn blood, and now she wanted to finish the kill. "Look at her," Marianne said, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Just look at her. She sits there with that blank look on her face, acting like she is the victim. But let us look at the facts. Let us look at the reality of the situation. Shall we?" She began counting off on her fingers, ticking off my failures with a rhythmic, brutal precision. "Fact number 1, she said. "You are 42 years old. 42. Most women your age are partners in law firms. They are running departments. They own vacation homes. You? You are sleeping in the same bedroom you slept in when you were in high school." She raised a second finger. "Fact number 2, you have a degree. We paid for that degree. 4 years of tuition, room, and board. So you could study English literature. And what has that degree earned you? What contribution have you made to the household income in the last decade?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "Zero. You have lived off the charity of your parents because you could not make it in the real world. You stumbled, and instead of getting back up, you crawled home and let us carry you." An uncomfortable shuffle rippled through the room. My cousin Mike cleared his throat and looked intently at the ceiling. Aunt Linda, who had been nervously shredding her napkin, finally spoke up. Her voice was small, trembling slightly under the weight of Marianne's projected anger. "Marianne," she said softly, "please, can we not do this here? The waiters are watching. This is private. Let us talk about this back at the house, where we can—" Marianne cut her off with a wave of her hand, a gesture so dismissive it was almost violent. "Private? Marianne scoffed. Why should it be private? We are family. Family knows the truth. Family does not keep secrets. Everyone at this table knows exactly what the situation is. Linda, you all whisper about it. I am just the only one brave enough to say it out loud. She looked around the table, challenging anyone to contradict her. Am I wrong? She demanded. Has anyone here seen Brooke pay a mortgage bill? Has anyone seen her name on a utility statement? No, because she is a dependent. She is a dependent listed on my tax return in spirit, if not on paper. I sat perfectly still. I did not blink. I did not look away. Inside, my heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm, but my hands were steady as they rested on the file folders in my briefcase. I was letting her talk. I was letting her dig. Every word she spoke was another shovel of dirt she was tossing over her own shoulder, digging a hole she did not even realize she was standing in. Douglas, tell them, Marianne commanded, turning to my father. Tell them about the value. Tell them what we are sacrificing to keep a roof over her head. My father looked miserable. He took a long swallow of his wine, draining the glass, and then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He avoided my eyes, focusing instead on the centerpiece of white roses. It is a good neighborhood, he mumbled. Speak up, Douglas. Marianne snapped. The market in Raleigh it is very competitive right now, he said, his voice gaining a little more volume. Though it sounded rehearsed, he sounded like he was reading from a script he had been forced to memorize. The square footage alone puts the property in the top tier for the zip code. $3,100 is actually a conservative estimate, if we put it on the open market, with the finished basement and the garage. We could probably get $3,500. $3,100 is the family rate, Marianne said, smiling tightly, because we are generous. I looked at Haley. She had gone completely rigid. The blue silk of her graduation gown was bunched in her fists under the table. Her face was flushed a deep, angry red, and her eyes were glistening with unshed tears of rage. The gold honor cords around her neck, which had been a source of such pride only an hour ago, now looked heavy, like a yoke. She looked like she wanted to rip them off. She looked like she wanted to flip the table and scream at her grandmother to shut up. She opened her mouth, and I knew exactly what she was going to say. She was going to tell them about the late nights I worked. She was going to tell them about the freelance contracts. She was going to blow my cover to defend me. I caught her eye. I did not shake my head. I just widened my eyes slightly. A microscopic signal we had developed over years of navigating Marianne's minefields. Freeze. Do not engage. Trust me. Haley hesitated. She saw the look in my eye. Not fear, but calculation. She closed her mouth, her jaw muscles working as she ground her teeth together. She sat back, exhaling a shaky breath, but she stayed silent. Good girl. I thought, this is not your war. I turned my attention back to Marianne. She was waiting for me to cry. She was waiting for me to beg. That was the script. That was how this scene had played out a dozen times in smaller ways over the years. She would attack. I would retreat. She would feel superior, and order would be restored to her world. I cleared my throat. You are right. I said. The words hung in the air. Marianne blinked, her mouth opening slightly. She had braced herself for an argument, for a defense. Agreement threw her off balance. Excuse me? She said. I nodded slowly, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. I said you are right. Mom, it is time we talked about financial responsibility. A woman of my age should not be living for free. It is important that everyone pays their fair share. It is important that the finances are transparent and that the true owner of the property is compensated for its use. Marianne narrowed her eyes, searching my face for sarcasm. She found none. I was giving her exactly what she asked for. Well, she said, straightening her blazer, I am glad you finally have the maturity to admit it. She looked around the table again, reclaiming her victory. See? Even she knows it. It is about time you stepped up. Brooke. She turned back to me, her voice hard and final. So, here's the deal. You have until tomorrow. Tomorrow is the 1st of the month. You write a check for $3,100, or you start packing boxes. I am done subsidizing your life. If you cannot pay, you can find a shelter or a studio apartment in the bad part of town. I do not care. But the free ride ends when the sun comes up. The table was deathly silent. This was it. The ultimatum. It was cruel. It was public. And it was designed to break me. I looked down at my briefcase. My fingers walked across the tabs of the hanging folders I had organized with obsessive care. Property tax, insurance, mortgage discharge, deed. I pulled the first file halfway out. The sound of the paper sliding against the leather was the only sound in the room. I looked up at Marianne. My face was calm, but inside, I felt a cold, sharp satisfaction. $3,100, I repeated. That is a very specific number. Mom, it is the market rate. She snapped. Is it? I asked. Or is that just the amount you need to cover the interest on the debts you have not told Dad about? Douglas's head snapped up. What? Marianne's face went white, then red. What are you talking about? Do not try to change the subject. I am not changing the subject. I said calmly. I am focusing very specifically on the subject. The subject is the house. The subject is who pays for it. And the subject is who owns it. I pulled the file completely out of the bag and set it on the table. It was a thick folder, blue, with a label that read 124 Oak Street, title deed in bold, black letters. Marianne stared at the folder. She knew that folder. She had not seen it in 16 years, not since the day she had sat at her kitchen table, weeping into a handkerchief, begging me to save them from foreclosure. She had suppressed the memory so deep she had convinced herself it never happened. But seeing the folder now, the physical reality of it, punched a hole in her delusion. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her voice losing its polished edge and becoming something more primal. "Put that away." I ignored her. I opened the folder. "You asked for rent." "Mom," I said, my voice steady and loud enough for everyone at the table to hear clearly. "You humiliated me in front of my daughter on her graduation day because you wanted to teach me a lesson about ownership." I picked up the top document. It was a copy of the deed, stamped with the official seal of the Wake County Register of Deeds. "So let us learn," I said. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It went from awkward tension to something electric. My relatives were leaning in. Aunt Linda had stopped shredding her napkin. Uncle Bob put his glasses on. They sensed that the dynamic had flipped. They realized that the briefcase was not a prop. It was a weapon. Marianne stood up, her chair screeching backward. "Douglas, stop her!" she shrieked. "She is making a scene. She is lying." Douglas did not move. He was staring at the folder on the table, his face draining of color. He looked from Marianne to me, and then back to the folder. He knew. Of course he knew. He just had not realized I had kept the receipts. "Sit down." "Mom," I said. I did not shout, but the command was absolute. Marianne froze. She looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time in years, she did not see the defeated daughter she wanted to see. She saw the woman who had quietly, invisibly, held her life together for nearly 2 decades. I slid the deed across the white tablecloth. It stopped right in front of her plate, next to her half-eaten steak. "Read the name on the line that says owner," I said. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the breath out of everyone in the room. Marianne looked down at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. She did not want to look, but she could not look away, and just like that. The dinner party was over. The trial had begun. To understand the silence that had fallen over the dinner table at the Oak and Vine, you have to understand the noise that filled my parents' kitchen 16 years ago. It was not the silence of a stunned restaurant, but the chaotic, weeping noise of a life collapsing. That deed on the table was not just a piece of paper. It was a time machine. As Marianne stared at it, I knew she was being dragged back to the same rainy Tuesday in November that I was remembering. I was 26 years old then. Haley was just a toddler, a little thing with pigtails, who was happily smashing Play-Doh on the linoleum floor, completely unaware that the roof over her head was about to be repossessed by the bank. I had come over because my father had called me. Douglas never called me. When I arrived, I found my mother, the great and proud Marianne Holt, sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands, sobbing so hard her shoulders shook. My father was pacing the room, his face gray, holding a letter from the bank like it was a death certificate. They were not just broke, they were destitute. They had refinanced the house 3 times to pay for cars, for vacations, for appearances. They had maxed out credit cards to pay off other credit cards. And finally, the music had stopped. The bank had sent a notice of default. They had 30 days to come up with $45,000 in back payments and penalties, or the foreclosure proceedings would begin. They were going to lose the house. They were going to lose their status. They were going to be exposed as frauds to the entire neighborhood. "Please," Marianne had wailed, clutching my hand with a grip that left bruises. "You have to help us. We cannot lose this house. It is all we have. Think of the humiliation. Think of what people will say." She did not ask me to save them because she loved the house. She asked me to save them because she loved her reputation. At the time, I was the only one in the family with liquid assets. My grandmother, Marianne's mother, had passed away the year before. She had known exactly who her daughter was, so she had bypassed Marianne completely and left the bulk of her modest estate to me. It was not a fortune, but it was a shield. It was enough to start a life, or as it turned out, enough to save one. I sat at that table, and I looked at the numbers. I was young, but I was not stupid. I knew that giving them the money was like throwing it into a furnace. If I paid their arrears, they would just fall behind again in 6 months. They were incapable of managing money because they viewed money as a right, not a resource. So I made them an offer, a business offer. I told them I would not give them the money. I told them I would buy the house. I would take the inheritance money and pay off the arrears completely. I would assume the mortgage. I would take over the property taxes and the insurance. In exchange, they would sign the deed over to me. They could continue to live there, rent-free, for as long as they needed. Provided they covered the utilities and basic upkeep, it was a lifeline. It was a way for them to stay in their beloved home, keep their standing in the community, and never have to admit to a soul that they had failed. I remember the look on Marianne's face when I proposed it. It was a mixture of relief and absolute loathing. She hated that she needed me. She hated that the power dynamic was shifting, but she signed. Douglas signed too, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. We did it properly. We hired a lawyer. We went to a notary. The deed was transferred. The mortgage was refinanced in my name, using my credit score, which I had fiercely protected. But there was one condition Marianne insisted on. It was the only time she stopped crying that afternoon. "No one can know," she had hissed, wiping her eyes. "No one, not your aunts, not your cousins. If anyone asks, this is still our house. You are just staying here while you get back on your feet. You are the one struggling. We are helping you." I should have said no. I should have told her that I would not participate in a lie that painted me as a failure. But I looked at Haley, playing on the floor. I looked at my parents, who seemed so small and pathetic in their panic. I wanted peace. I wanted my daughter to grow up with grandparents who were not destitute. I wanted to be the good daughter. So I agreed. I promised I would never tell a soul that I owned the house, and for 16 years, I kept that promise. While my relatives whispered about how generous Marianne was for letting me stay in her spare room, I was upstairs in that room, working. They all thought I was unemployed, or working part-time jobs that led nowhere. They did not know about Northlake Analytics Group. Northlake Analytics was a data processing firm based in Chicago. I had started with them as a remote entry clerk when Haley was a baby, working at night while she slept. But I was good at it. I was fast, accurate, and reliable. Over the years, I had moved up. I became a team lead, then a project manager, and eventually a senior data analyst. I managed a team of 15 people distributed across 3 time zones. I processed complex data sets for healthcare providers and logistics companies. I earned a salary that was significantly higher than what my father had made before he retired, but because I worked from a laptop in my bedroom, usually with headphones on, Marianne dismissed it. To her, if you did not put on a suit and drive to an office, you did not have a real job. She told the family I was doing little computer things for pocket money. Every month, for 192 months, I paid the mortgage. I have the records in the briefcase. Every single transaction is documented. On the first of every month, $2,450 left my account and went to the mortgage servicer. Every year, I paid the property taxes, which averaged around $4,800. I paid the homeowner's insurance. I paid for the new roof when the old one leaked in the winter of 2018. I paid for the HVAC system replacement when the air conditioning died in the summer of 2021. I paid for everything. And every time I wrote a check, I felt a strange mix of resentment and pride. I was providing. I was the head of the household in every way that mattered financially. I was securing an asset that would one day belong to Haley. That was what kept me going. I told myself that the house was my savings account. I was investing in my daughter's future. But the social cost was agonizing. I remember the Thanksgiving dinners. Oh, the Thanksgiving dinners were the worst. We would have 20 people crammed into the dining room, my dining room. Marianne would sit at the head of the table, carving the turkey I had paid for, pouring wine I had bought, and she would hold court. "I am just so glad we can provide a stable home for Brooke and Haley," she would say, sighing dramatically. "It is not easy, having a full house at our age. But what can you do? Family is family. You make sacrifices." And the aunts would nod sympathetically. "You are a saint, Marianne," they would say. Most parents would have kicked them out by now. "Brooke is lucky to have you." I would sit there, chewing my turkey, swallowing the rage along with the dry meat. I would look at Haley, who was growing up hearing this narrative. Mom is weak. Mom needs help. Grandma is the savior. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and throw the property tax receipt on the cranberry sauce, but I didn't. I stayed silent because I was afraid of the war. I was afraid that if I shattered Marianne's fragile ego, she would make our lives a living hell. She was a master of emotional guerrilla warfare. She would turn Haley against me. She would poison the family. So I took the hit. I let her be the hero of her own fictional story, because I knew that in the real world, in the legal world, I held all the cards. I thought that eventually, they would be grateful. I thought that maybe, one day, Douglas would pull me aside and say, "Thank you. Thank you for saving us. Thank you for letting us keep our dignity." But gratitude never came. Entitlement came instead. The more I paid, the more they felt they deserved it. They started treating me not like a savior, but like a tenant who was late with the rent. They complained if I didn't mow the lawn fast enough. They complained if Haley's toys were in the living room. They forgot that they were guests in my house. They forgot that the only reason they were not living in a one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town was because I allowed it. There was one incident, though, that should have warned me that their deception went deeper than just ego. It was about 4 years ago. I had come home early from a doctor's appointment. The house was supposed to be empty. Marianne was at her bridge club, and Douglas was supposedly golfing. But as I pulled into the driveway, I saw a car I did not recognize parked near the garage. It was a beat-up sedan with out-of-state plates. I walked into the house quietly. I heard voices coming from the basement. The basement was finished. It had a small kitchenette, a bathroom, and a separate entrance from the backyard. It was a nice space, but we rarely used it except for storage. I walked to the top of the basement stairs and listened. "I told you, cash only." I heard my father say. His voice sounded nervous. "No paper trail." "Do not worry, old man." A younger, rougher voice replied. "You get your envelope on the 1st. I just need a place to crash for a few months. No questions asked." I heard the sound of a heavy door closing. When I confronted Douglas about it later that evening, he turned pale. He stammered and looked at Marianne for help. Marianne stepped in smoothly, her face a mask of casual dismissal. "Oh, that?" she said. "That was just a friend of your father's. He is going through a rough divorce and needed a place to store some boxes. He is not staying there. Do not be so nosy. Brooke, it is unbecoming. I let it go. I wanted to believe them. I did not want to believe that my parents were running an illegal rental operation in the basement of a house they did not own. I did not want to believe they were pocketing cash while I was upstairs paying their mortgage. I buried the suspicion. I filed it away in the back of my mind, along with the insults and the slights, but I remembered it, and as I sat in the restaurant, watching Marianne stare at the deed, that memory came flooding back. The basement, the cash, the friend, it all started to align with a sickening clarity. Marianne finally looked up from the document. Her face was no longer pale. It was mottled with red patches of fury. She did not look like a mother looking at a daughter. She looked like a cornered animal. "This is a forgery," she spat out. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Even with the county seal right in front of her eyes, she was going to deny reality. "It is not a forgery." "Mom," I said, "and you know it. You signed it. We were at the notary on 3rd Street. It was November 14th, 2010. It was raining. You wore a black raincoat." "I do not remember that," she said, crossing her arms. "Of course you do not," I said, "because remembering it would mean admitting that for the last 16 years. You have been living on my charity. It would mean admitting that every time you told Aunt Linda that I was a burden, you were lying. It would mean admitting that the $3,100 you just demanded from me is not rent. It is extortion." I turned to the rest of the table. My relatives were stunned. They were looking back and forth between us like spectators at a tennis match. But the ball had stopped moving. The ball was in my court, and I was holding it high. My mother and father do not own the house at 124 Oak Street. I said clearly, addressing my aunts and uncles, "I do. I bought it from them 16 years ago to save them from foreclosure. I have paid every mortgage payment. I have paid every tax bill. I have paid for every repair." I looked at Haley. Her eyes were wide, shining with a mixture of shock and a sudden, fierce pride. She was putting the pieces together. The late nights I worked, the way I managed the budget, the way I never asked her grandparents for anything. She was realizing that her mother was not a failure. Her mother was the vault that had kept the family safe. I turned back to Marianne. "So," I said, "let us talk about tomorrow. You said I have until noon to pay rent or get out. I am afraid that is not how this works. Since I am the landlord, and you are the occupants with no lease, the rules are a little different." I reached into the briefcase again. I had one more document to show them. It wasn't a deed. It was a letter I had drafted weeks ago, hoping I would never have to use it. But Marianne had forced my hand. "You wanted to talk about market value." "Mom?" I asked. "You wanted to talk about the real world?" I placed the letter on the table. "Let us talk about eviction." The silence in the private dining room of the Oak and Vine was no longer the silence of awkwardness. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a courtroom right before the verdict is read. The deed lay in the center of the table, a stark white rectangle against the dark navy tablecloth. It sat there like a loaded gun that I had just placed between the salt and pepper shakers. My Uncle Steve, who had been a real estate attorney for 30 years in Charlotte, was the first to move. He did not look at Marianne, and he did not look at me. He reached out with a hand that was trembling slightly and pulled the document toward him. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, narrowing his eyes as he scanned the text. Marianne made a noise in her throat, a high-pitched sound of protest. "Do not touch that, Steve," she snapped, her voice tight with panic. "It is just some nonsense Brooke typed up on her computer. It is meaningless. It is a prop." Steve ignored her. He was reading the fine print. He ran his finger over the embossed seal in the bottom right corner, the tactile proof of authenticity that no home printer could replicate. He looked at the book and page number stamped by the county clerk. He looked at the date, November 14th, 2010. He looked up, and his face was pale. The jovial, slightly tipsy uncle who had been joking about football 10 minutes ago was gone. In his place was a lawyer looking at a piece of irrefutable evidence. "It is real. Marianne," Steve said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. This is a warranty deed. It is recorded, it is notarized, and the grantee is listed as the Martin Family Trust, with Brooke Martin as the sole trustee and beneficiary. He looked at me, a newfound respect, and perhaps a little fear, in his eyes. You put it in a trust? He asked. I nodded. To protect the asset, I said calmly, and to ensure that if anything happened to me, the property would bypass probate and go directly to Haley without anyone else being able to contest it. I did not look at Marianne when I said anyone else, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. A murmur went through the table. My cousins were leaning in, trying to get a look at the paper. Aunt Linda had her hand over her mouth. Marianne lunged. It was a desperate, ungraceful movement. She snatched the deed from Steve's hand, wrinkling the paper. "Give me that!" she shrieked. "It is a lie. It is a trick. She manipulated us. We were under duress." She looked at the document, her eyes scanning it frantically, looking for a loophole, a mistake, anything she could use to tear it apart. But the law is cold, and the law does not care about narratives. The signature at the bottom was hers. The signature next to it was Douglas's. The notary seal was legitimate. "This means nothing," Marianne yelled, shaking the paper at me. "You tricked us. You said you were just helping. You said the house was still ours." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I had entered the phase of the evening where I was no longer a daughter. I was a prosecutor. I said I would save the house from foreclosure. I corrected her. And I did. I bought it. I paid off the $45,000 you owed in arrears. I took over the mortgage. I saved you from bankruptcy. And in exchange, I took title. That was the deal. "That is not how I remember it," Douglas shouted. He had finally found his voice, though it cracked with desperation. "We paid you. We gave you money every month." I turned my gaze to my father. He shrank back slightly, but he kept his chin up, trying to maintain the facade for the sake of his brother and sister-in-law. "Did you?" I asked. I reached into the briefcase again. The sound of the latches clicking was the only rhythm in the room. I pulled out a second folder, this one thick and color-coded. I opened it and began to lay out the documents, one by one, dealing them onto the table like tarot cards of doom. "Exhibit A," I said, sliding a stack of papers toward Uncle Steve. Mortgage statements from 2010 to the present, every single one of them paid via direct debit from my account at First Citizens Bank. I slapped another stack down. Exhibit B, property tax receipts for the last 16 years, Wake County, paid in full, by Brooke Martin, Thwack. Exhibit C, homeowners' insurance policies, hazard, flood, and liability. Policyholder, Brooke Martin. Premium payer, Brooke Martin. I looked at Douglas. "You mentioned you paid me." I said, "Let us clarify that. For the first 6 months after the transfer, you contributed $200 a month for utilities. That stopped in May of 2011 when you bought a new set of golf clubs. Since then, you have paid exactly $0 toward the principal, interest, taxes, or insurance of the home you live in." Douglas opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the paper trail spread out across the white tablecloth. It was a sea of evidence. There were bank logos, government seals, payment confirmation numbers. It was a wall of facts that no amount of bluster could breach. The rest of the family was silent, but their eyes were wide. They were doing the math. They were rewriting 16 years of history in their heads. All the times Marianne had complained about money, all the times she had bragged about her house, all the times she had sneered at my lack of contribution, they were realizing that every single family gathering had been staged on a set that I had paid for. Marianne threw the deed onto the table. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably now. She looked around the room, seeing the doubt in everyone's eyes, and she panicked. She switched tactics. If she could not deny the paperwork, she would attack my character. "You are a snake," she hissed. "You have been planning this. You have been hoarding these papers, waiting for a chance to humiliate us. What kind of daughter does that? What kind of monster keeps a file on her own parents?" I looked her dead in the eye, the kind of daughter who knows her mother. I said, I knew this day would come. Mom, I knew that eventually. You would try to rewrite history to make yourself the victim and me the villain. I knew that one day you would try to use the house as a weapon against me. So yes, I kept the receipts. I kept every single one. I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. But I am not done. I said. I reached into the briefcase one last time. This time, I pulled out a single, thin file. It contained only a few sheets of paper, staples in the corner. We have established ownership, I said, my voice taking on a harder edge. And we have established that you have not paid a dime in 16 years. But there is one more thing we need to discuss. I slid the paper across to Haley. Haley picked it up. Her hands were steady, much steadier than mine had been at her age. She looked at the document, and her eyebrows shot up. What is this? Haley asked. Read the headline, I said. Haley read it aloud. Her voice was clear, cutting through the tension. Cozy basement apartment for rent. Private entrance. Cash only. No credit check required. Available immediately. Contact Doug at 555-0199. I looked at Douglas. He went white. He looked like he was going to be sick. That is old, he stammered. That is from years ago. I shook my head. Look at the date on the printout. Dad, I said, that listing was active on Craigslist 3 months ago, and 6 months before that, and 2 years before that. I turned to the table, addressing the jury of my relatives. My parents have been renting out the basement of my house for years. I said, they have been bringing strangers into the home where my daughter sleeps. They have been collecting cash rent, $1,200 a month, according to the emails I recovered, and pocketing it. I looked at Marianne. You told me I was a financial burden. I said, you told the family I was a leech. Meanwhile, you were generating $14,000 a year in illegal rental income from a property you do not own, without the owner's permission, and without insurance coverage for tenants. Marianne stood up again, her face twisting into a snarl. You have been spying on us, she screamed. She pointed a shaking finger at me. You hacked our emails. You have been watching us. That is illegal. I will have you arrested. The accusation hung in the air, desperate and pathetic. I did not flinch. I did not apologize. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. I am not spying on you. Marianne, I said coldly, I am monitoring my asset. When you own a property, you have a right to know if the occupants are running an illegal business out of the basement. You have a right to know if they are exposing you to liability. I pointed to the papers Haley was holding. And for the record, I did not hack anything. You left your iPad unlocked on the kitchen counter last Thanksgiving. I saw the notifications popping up. Tenant coming at 3 p.m. Cash received. It was not hard to put together. The room was absolutely frozen. The waiters had stopped moving in the shadows. The other diners in the restaurant had gone quiet, sensing the explosion happening in the private room. This was the kill shot. The deed proved ownership, but the rental scheme proved malice. It proved that they were not just proud parents trying to save face. They were actively exploiting me. They were using my property to fund the lifestyle they used to shame me. Haley slowly lowered the paper. She looked at her grandmother. It was a look of profound disappointment. It was the look of a statue crumbling. For her entire life, Haley had been told a specific story. Grandma and Grandpa are the providers. Mom is the struggling artist type who needs help. Haley had loved them for their generosity. She had tolerated Marianne's passive-aggressive comments because she believed Marianne had earned the right to be critical. Now, she saw the truth. She saw the deception. She saw the theft. Grandma, Haley said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it hurt more than a shout. You charged people rent? In our house? It is our house, Marianne yelled, slamming her hand on the table. We raised you there. We fed you. It is Mom's house, Haley said, correcting her with a sharpness I had never heard before. She looked at the deed again, then at the tax receipts. She looked at the timeline. Haley turned to me. Her eyes were swimming with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of realization. She was replaying her childhood, seeing every moment through a new lens. The nights I stayed up working, the refusal to buy new clothes for myself, the quiet endurance. You paid for everything. Haley whispered, all this time, the tuition, the braces, the car. It was all you. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. I had wanted to protect her from this, but in the end, the truth was the only protection left. Yes, honey, I said, it was me. Haley looked at Marianne again. This time, there was no affection in her eyes. There was only a cold, hard judgment. You lied, Haley said. She stood up, looking down at her grandmother. You stood there tonight, on my graduation, and you called my mother a freeloader. You tried to charge her rent for a house she owns. Haley laughed, a short, disbelief-filled sound. You are not just mean, Grandma. You are a fraud, Marianne gasped, clutching her pearls as if she had been shot. Haley, Douglas barked. Do not speak to your grandmother like that. Haley turned her gaze on him. Douglas withered. And you, Haley said, you let her do it. You knew. You knew Mom owned the house. You knew she was paying the bills. And you stood there and let Grandma humiliate her in front of everyone. She shook her head. I am done, Haley said. She reached over and took my hand. Her grip was strong. It was the grip of an adult woman who had just chosen her side. Mom, Haley said, let us go. I looked at the table, at the mess of papers that represented 16 years of my life. I looked at my aunts and uncles, who were staring at Marianne with open disgust. I looked at Marianne, who was slumped in her chair, defeated, surrounded by the debris of her own lies. Not yet, I told Haley gently. I turned back to Marianne. We are not leaving yet, I said, because there is one more document in the briefcase. Marianne looked up, fear etched into every line of her face. She knew, and I knew, that the game was over, but I had to make sure it never started again. I reached for the last file. The air in the room seemed to crackle. The big reveal was done, but the sentence had not yet been passed, and I was the judge. Marianne stared at the rental listing Haley was holding, and for a moment, I thought she might actually faint. Her face went slack, the color draining away to leave a grayish, putty-like complexion, but I had underestimated her resilience. Marianne was like a cockroach. She could survive a nuclear blast if she thought there was a social ladder to climb on the other side. She blinked rapidly, her mind visibly rebooting, searching for a new angle of attack. The legal angle had failed. The I am the provider narrative had been nuked. So she went for the nuclear option of toxic parents everywhere. She weaponized her own motherhood. She let out a sob. It was a theatrical, strangled sound that made Aunt Linda jump. I cannot believe this, Marianne wailed, pressing a hand to her chest. She looked around the table, her eyes swimming with sudden, summoned tears. I cannot believe my own daughter would do this to me, after everything we did for you. She turned her gaze on me, and the sadness in her eyes hardened instantly into accusation. We raised you. Brooke, we sacrificed everything for you. I wiped your bottom. I sat up with you when you were sick. I paid for your ballet lessons. And this is how you repay us? By dragging our name through the mud in front of the entire family? She gestured wildly at the room, at the stunned faces of my aunts and uncles. On your daughter's graduation day? She hissed. You have no shame. You waited for the happiest day of Haley's life to destroy her grandparents. You are selfish. You have always been selfish. The old Brooke, the Brooke from 10 years ago, would have crumbled. I would have felt the familiar crush of guilt. The programmed response that said, Mother is right. I am bad. I must apologize. But that Brooke was gone. She had been replaced by a woman who had paid property taxes for 16 years. I looked at her calmly. I did not raise my voice. I did not let a single crack show in my armor. I did not choose this topic. Mom, I said, you did. Marianne opened her mouth to interrupt, but I cut her off. You chose to start this conversation. I continued, my voice steady and cold. You chose to sit at this table, on the day Haley graduated with honors, and demand rent from me. You chose to humiliate me. You chose to call me a failure in front of everyone I know. All I did was finish the conversation you started. Marianne flinched as if I had slapped her. She looked at Douglas for support, but my father was staring at his water glass like it contained the secrets of the universe. He wanted no part of this. He was smart enough to know when the ship was sinking. Marianne realized she was alone. Her eyes darted around the room, frantic. She needed a weapon. She needed something to counter the stack of certified documents sitting on the table. Wait, she cried out, her eyes lighting up with a manic desperation. You think you are so smart with your deeds and your trusts, but you forgot something. She began digging through her purse again, shoving aside compacts and tissue packets. Her hands were shaking, but there was a triumph in her movements. You forgot the agreement, she announced. She pulled out a piece of paper. It was not a legal document. It was a sheet of personalized stationery, the kind with little blue flowers in the corner that she had used for thank you notes in the 90s. It was folded into a small square, worn at the edges. She unfolded it and smoothed it out on the table, slapping her hand down on it. Read it, she commanded. Read it and weep. Brooke. Uncle Steve leaned forward again. His curiosity piqued. He looked at the paper, then back at Marianne. What is this? He asked. It is a contract, Marianne declared. A buyback agreement. Brooke signed it the day we transferred the deed. She promised, she swore on her life, that as soon as she was financially stable, she would transfer the title back to us. She looked at me with a sneer. You promised, Brooke. You said you were just holding it for safekeeping. You said the house would always be ours. I looked at the piece of paper. From where I sat, I could see the handwriting. It was scrawled in blue ink. It looked frantic. I reached out and took the paper. Marianne tried to snatch it back, but I was faster. Let me see, I said. I held it up to the light. The text was short. I, Brooke Martin, promise to return the property at 124 Oak Street to Marianne and Douglas Holt as soon as I have secured a full-time job. This transfer is temporary and for asset protection only. Below it was a signature, Brooke Martin. I stared at the signature, then I looked at the date scribbled in the corner. December 10th, 2010. I let out a short, incredulous breath. It was almost insulting how bad this was. Mom, I said, looking at her with genuine pity. Did you really think this would work? It is your signature, she shouted. You signed it. I shook my head slowly. I placed the paper on the table next to the real deed, inviting the comparison. First of all, I said, pointing to the date, this is dated December 10th, 2010. So? She challenged. That was right after the transfer. I looked at her. On December 10th, 2010. I was in the hospital. Mom, I had pneumonia. I was admitted for 3 days. I was on an IV drip. I was not sitting at your kitchen table signing stationery. Marianne's eyes widened. She had forgotten. Of course she had forgotten. She only remembered events where she was the center of attention. And secondly, I continued, pointing to the signature, look at the B in Brooke. I pulled my driver's license out of my wallet and tossed it onto the table. I have looped my B since I was 12 years old. It is a distinct loop. The signature on this paper? It has a sharp, jagged B. It looks exactly like the way you write the letter B. Mom, I looked around the table. This is a forgery, I stated plainly, and it is a lazy one. It is not notarized, it is not witnessed, and the handwriting matches Marianne's, not mine. Uncle Steve picked up the note. He compared it to the deed. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at Marianne, and for the first time, I saw genuine disgust in his eyes. He was a lawyer. He dealt with liars every day. But seeing his own sister-in-law try to pass off a crude forgery to steal a house from her daughter, that was a new low. "Marianne," Steve said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is embarrassing. Put this away before you commit a felony in a restaurant." Marianne snatched the paper back, crumpling it in her fist. Her face was a mask of pure venom. "You are twisting everything," she screamed. "You are ungrateful. I will sue you. Do you hear me? I will take you to court. I will tell the judge you tricked two elderly people. I will tell everyone what a snake you are. I will ruin your reputation in this town." She was flailing now, grasping at straws, trying to bully me into submission with threats of social destruction. "Go ahead," I said. I reached into my briefcase again. I had one last document to deliver. This one was not a record of the past. It was a command for the future. "If you want to go to court, Mom, I am ready. In fact, I have already started the process." I pulled out a crisp, white envelope with the logo of a law firm in the corner. It was not Uncle Steve's firm. It was a firm in Raleigh known for being aggressive in property disputes. I had retained them 2 weeks ago. Just in case, I slid the envelope across the table. "What is this?" Douglas asked, his voice trembling. "It is a formal notice," I said. I waited for them to open it, but they just stared at it, so I told them what it said. "It is a notice to cease and desist," I explained, keeping my tone professional. "It demands that you immediately stop all illegal rental activities at the property. It notifies you that any further unauthorized tenants will be considered trespassing." I paused, locking eyes with Marianne. "And it is also a notice of termination of tenancy at will." Marianne's mouth fell open. "You are kicking us out?" she gasped. "I am terminating the agreement that allowed you to live there for free," I corrected. "You have 30 days. After that, we can discuss a lease agreement at fair market value, paid to me, the owner, or you can vacate the premises." Marianne looked like she had been punched in the gut. The reality was finally sinking in. This was not a family spat. This was legal eviction. "I will not leave," she shouted. "It is my house. I will never leave." "Then the sheriff will escort you out," I said simply. "That is the procedure." The table fell silent again. The air was so thick with tension it felt hard to breathe. Marianne was panting, her chest heaving, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a weapon, looking for anything. Douglas suddenly stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. He looked terrified, not the vague anxiety he had shown earlier, but real, visceral fear. Sweat was beading on his forehead. "Brooke," he said, his voice cracking. Can I speak to you? Outside? Just for a minute?" Marianne grabbed his arm. "Sit down. Douglas, do not talk to her." "She is the enemy!" Douglas shook her off. It was the first time in my life I had ever seen him physically reject her command. "Let go of me. Marianne," he snapped. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Please, Brooke, just for a minute." I hesitated. I did not want to give them any quarter, but the look in his eyes was haunting. He looked like a man who was watching an avalanche coming down the mountain and was the only one who saw it. "Fine," I said. I stood up. I looked at Haley. "Stay here." I told her, "Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything." Haley nodded. She was sitting up straight, her hands folded on the table, staring down her grandmother with a gaze that could cut glass. "I will be fine." "Mom," she said. I walked out of the private dining room, following my father into the hallway. The noise of the main restaurant washed over us. Clinking glasses, laughter, jazz music. It felt surreal, like stepping from a war zone back into civilization. Douglas walked to a quiet corner near the restrooms and turned to face me. He looked old. Suddenly, incredibly old. "Brooke," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You have to stop." I crossed my arms. "I am not stopping. Dad, she asked for rent. She humiliated me. She has been stealing from me with that basement rental. I am done being the doormat." "No, you do not understand," he said, shaking his head frantically. "It is not about the rent. It is not about the basement. Then what is it?" I asked. Douglas looked over his shoulder. checking to make sure Marianne had not followed us. He leaned in close, smelling of fear and stale wine. She did something, he whispered. What did she do? I asked, my patience thinning. She was desperate. Brooke, the credit cards. She maxed them all out again. The gambling. She started playing online poker again. She lost a lot. I sighed. I knew about the gambling. It was an open secret. So she is broke, I said. That is nothing new. That is why I pay the mortgage. Douglas grabbed my arm. His fingers dug into my sleeve. No, Brooke, listen to me. She needed money. A lot of money. Fast. And the bank. They would not give her a personal loan. Her credit is shot. A cold feeling started to creep up my spine. So? I asked. So she found a way. Douglas whispered. She found a friend. A friend who knows a notary. My blood ran cold. What are you saying? Dad? Douglas looked like he was about to cry. She told me she fixed it. She told me she got a loan. But Brooke, the house is the only collateral we have. Or, the only collateral you have. Before I could ask him to clarify, the door to the private room opened. Haley stepped out. She looked furious. Mom, she said, you need to come back in. Grandma is telling everyone that you stole her jewelry. I looked at Douglas. He backed away, his face pale. Just be careful, he whispered. She is not going to stop. She cannot stop. She is in too deep. I walked back into the dining room, my mind racing. She found a notary. The house is the only collateral. What did that mean? She couldn't borrow against the house. She didn't own it. The bank would check the title. They would see my name. Unless... I sat back down. Marianne was mid-sentence, telling Aunt Linda about a diamond necklace that had supposedly vanished from her dresser last Christmas, implying I had pawned it. She is a thief, Marianne was saying. She steals from her own mother. Haley slammed her hand on the table. Shut up, Haley yelled. Just shut up. Grandma. The room froze. Haley Martin, the quiet, studious girl, the girl who never raised her voice, was standing up, trembling with rage. Stop lying, Haley shouted. Mom has never stolen a thing in her life. She has been paying your bills for 16 years. She saved your house. And you sit here and slander her? Haley looked around the table at the aunts and uncles. And you, she said, pointing at them. You all sat here and listened. For years. You let Grandma talk about my mom like she was garbage. You laughed at her jokes. You nodded when she called Mom a loser. She looked at Aunt Linda. You knew Mom was working. Aunt Linda? You saw her laptop. You knew she wasn't just playing games, but you never said anything. Because it was easier to let Grandma be the queen, right? Linda looked down, her face flushing a deep crimson. It is shameful, Haley said, her voice breaking. You are all shameful. The silence that followed was absolute. Marianne looked small, for the first time all night. She looked truly small. Her narrative had not just been challenged, it had been dismantled by the very person she claimed to love the most. I reached out and took Haley's hand. I pulled her down gently. It is okay, honey, I said softly. It is okay. I was about to signal for the check. I was about to end this nightmare and take my daughter home. But then my phone buzzed. It was sitting on the table. Screen up, a text message notification lit up the glass. It was from Uncle Steve. He was sitting right across from me, but he was looking down at his phone, typing furiously. He must have been accessing public records databases. He was a real estate lawyer. After all, he knew how to look things up. I looked at the screen. Brooke. I just ran a quick title search on the county portal. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. I unlocked the phone and opened the message. The text continued. There is a new lien recorded against the property. A home equity line of credit, $50,000, recorded 3 weeks ago. I stared at the words. $50,000. Lender, Shadow Creek Finance. Borrower, Brooke Martin. I froze. I had not applied for a loan. I had not signed any papers. I looked up at Marianne. She was picking at a loose thread on the tablecloth. refusing to meet my eyes. Douglas. She found a friend. A friend who knows a notary. The realization hit me like a freight train. She hadn't just lied. She hadn't just extorted me for rent. She had stolen my identity. She had forged my signature on a loan application. She had notarized it with a fake witness, and she had put a $50,000 lien on my house. The cat and mouse game was over. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a crime scene. The drive away from the Oak and Vine was one of the longest journeys of my life. Even though it only took 20 minutes, the silence inside my car was heavy. But it was a different kind of silence than the one that had suffocated us at the dinner table. That had been the silence of shock. This was the silence of decompression. It was the sound of two people trying to breathe again after holding their breath for 3 hours. I glanced over at Haley in the passenger seat. She had taken off her graduation cap and it sat on her lap, her fingers idly tracing the tassel. She looked exhausted. The fire that had propelled her to stand up to her grandmother had burned out, leaving behind a young woman who looked like she just wanted to curl up in a ball and sleep for a week. I reached over and squeezed her hand. "I am sorry," I said softly. "I really am. Honey, that was not how tonight was supposed to go." Haley looked at me, and her eyes were tired but clear. "Do not apologize." "Mom," she said, "you did not ruin it. Grandma did. And honestly, seeing you shut her down was better than any party." I forced a smile, but my stomach was still churning. The text message from Uncle Steve was burning a hole in my mind. $50,000. Lien. Shadow Creek Finance. I wanted to drive straight to the police station. I wanted to scream, but I looked at Haley, and I knew I had to be a mother first and a victim second. I had to salvage what was left of this night. "We are not going home yet," I said, turning the wheel. "Where are we going?" she asked. "We are going to get the most expensive, unhealthy ice cream sundaes we can find," I said, "and we are going to sit in the car and eat them and listen to bad pop music, because you graduated with honors, and I will be damned if the last memory of this night is Marianne Holt's voice." We did exactly that. We sat in a parking lot, eating ice cream that cost $12 a cup, and for an hour, we pretended that the world was normal. We pretended that my mother had not just committed a felony against me. We pretended that tomorrow was just a regular Tuesday. But when I finally dropped Haley off at her apartment near the campus, she insisted on staying there, saying she needed space from the toxic zone of the house, and drove back to 124 Oak Street alone. The reality crashed back down on me. I pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same as it always did. The porch light was on. The hydrangeas I had planted 5 years ago were blooming in the moonlight. But as I looked at the dark windows, I did not see a home. I saw a crime scene. I saw a collateral asset. I saw a lie made of brick and mortar. I did not go inside. I could not bring myself to walk through the front door and face them. I slept in a hotel downtown. It cost me $200. But buying a night of safety was worth every penny. The next morning, the investigation began. I woke up at 6 o'clock, my mind instantly snapping into high alert. There was no grogginess, no hitting the snooze button. I was fueled by a cold, clinical rage. I showered, dressed in my sharpest blazer, and opened my laptop. First, I called the law firm I had retained for the eviction notice. It was 7:45 in the morning, but I left a message on the partner's emergency line. Then, I called Uncle Steve. He answered on the second ring. "Did you sleep?" he asked. His voice sounded rough. "No," I said. "Steve, I need the details." "What exactly did you see on the portal?" "I am emailing you the PDF right now," he said. "I pulled the full instrument image this morning. It is ugly." "Brooke," I refreshed my email. A notification popped up. Subject: Instrument 2, 026-45902. Deed of Trust. I opened the file. My heart hammered against my ribs. A painful, rhythmic thud. There it was, a recorded deed of trust, filed 22 days ago. Borrower: Brooke Martin. Lender: Shadow Creek Finance, LLC. Amount, $50,000. Collateral, the real property located at 124 Oak Street. I scrolled down to the last page, and there, at the bottom, was my name, Brooke Martin. It was signed in blue ink. I zoomed in on the signature. It was a good attempt. I had to give her that. She had tried to loop the B like I did. She had tried to make the M sharp and angular. But to my eyes, it was a clumsy forgery. The pressure was all wrong. The slant was too vertical. It lacked the natural flow of a signature written by a hand that had written it 10,000 times. It looked like a drawing of a signature. Below it was the notary acknowledgement. State of North Carolina. County of Wake. I, Patricia Vance, a notary public, do hereby certify that Brooke Martin personally appeared before me this day and acknowledged the due execution of the foregoing instrument. It was dated the 4th of January. I stared at the date. January 4th. A cold smile touched my lips. Marianne was sloppy. She was so arrogant, so used to getting away with her lies, that she hadn't even bothered to check my calendar. I opened my work calendar. I went back 3 weeks. January 4th. I was not in Raleigh on January 4th. I was in Chicago. I had been flown out to the Northlake Analytics headquarters for an annual strategy summit. I had left on the 3rd and returned on the 5th. I had a plane ticket. I had hotel receipts. I had Uber records. I had a geotagged photo of myself standing in front of the Bean in Millennium Park at the exact time this document was allegedly being signed in a notary's office in North Carolina. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was the breath of exoneration. She is done. I whispered to the empty hotel room. I spent the next 3 hours assembling my defense. This was no longer about family dynamics. This was a forensic investigation. I was not a daughter anymore. I was a data analyst. And I was processing the most important data set of my life. I downloaded my flight itinerary from Delta Airlines. I downloaded my folio from the Palmer House Hilton. I pulled my credit card statement showing a charge for deep dish pizza at Lou Malnati's on the evening of the 4th. Then I turned my attention to the lender. Shadow Creek Finance. A quick Google search revealed exactly what I expected. They were a hard money lender, the kind that advertised on late-night television and telephone poles. Bad credit? No problem. Cash fast. Use your home equity. They were predatory. They were expensive, and they clearly did not do their due diligence on identity verification. I called their number. A woman with a tired voice answered. Shadow Creek? This is Brenda. My name is Brooke Martin, I said, keeping my voice level. I am calling regarding loan number 492201. One moment, Brenda said. I heard the clicking of a keyboard. Okay. Ms. Martin, I see you here. 50,000. First payment is due on the 1st of February. Did you want to set up autopay? No, Brenda. I said, I do not want to set up autopay. I want to report a fraud. There was a pause. Excuse me? I did not sign that loan application. I said, I did not receive $50,000, and I was not in the state of North Carolina on the day it was notarized. You have issued a loan based on a forged instrument, and you have placed a fraudulent lien on my property. The tone on the other end shifted instantly. Ma'am, we have a notarized signature on file. We verified the ID. You verified a fake ID presented by an imposter. I corrected her. I am sending my attorney over with an affidavit of forgery and proof of my whereabouts on the date of signing. I suggest you freeze those funds immediately if they have not already been drained. I hung up before she could argue. Next, I drove to the bank. My bank. First Citizens, where I held my legitimate accounts. I needed to make sure Marianne hadn't touched those. Thankfully, everything was secure. But while I was there, I sat down with a branch manager I had known for years. I showed him the digital copy of the fraudulent loan. This is a HELOC, he said, frowning at the screen. But it is a second position lien. They did not pay off your primary mortgage. They just slapped a second debt on top of it. Where did the money go? I asked. He looked at the disbursement details on the PDF. It looks like it was wire transferred, he said, to an account at... Woodforest National Bank. I nodded. Marianne banked at Woodforest. It was all coming together. The pieces were locking into place with a terrifying precision. Marianne had been desperate. Douglas had mentioned gambling debts and credit cards. She needed $50,000 to plug a hole in a sinking ship. She knew she couldn't get a loan, so she used the only asset she had access to, the house she pretended was hers. She must have found a notary, this Patricia Vance, who was either corrupt or incredibly negligent. She forged my name. She took the money. And she probably thought she could pay it back before I ever noticed. Or maybe she didn't care if I noticed. Maybe she thought that even if I found out, I would be too weak to do anything about it. Maybe she thought I would just pay it off to avoid the shame of a family scandal. She had bet $50,000 on my submission. She had lost. My phone began to buzz around 10 o'clock. It was Marianne. I did not answer. It buzzed again, and again, and again. I set the phone on the desk and watched it vibrate. Mom, Mom, Mom. She left a voicemail. I waited until the notification appeared. Then I played it on speaker. Brooke! Her voice was shrill, panicked. Where are you? Why aren't you at the house? We need to talk. You are blowing this out of proportion. It was just a misunderstanding. I was going to pay it back. Call me. I saved the voicemail. Evidence. Admission of guilt. 10 minutes later, another call. This time, the voicemail was different. She was crying. How can you do this to us? We are old people. Do you want to see your father in jail? Do you want to kill me? My blood pressure is through the roof. You are a cruel, heartless child. Saved. Emotional manipulation. Then, 20 minutes later, the mask slipped completely. You think you are so smart? You think you can win? I am your mother. I brought you into this world, and I can take you out of it. You ungrateful little bitch. Pick up the phone. Saved. Threat. I did not reply to any of them. I was practicing the gray rock method, a technique my therapist had taught me years ago but I had never fully employed until now. Be boring. Be unresponsive. Be a rock that gives the narcissist nothing to feed on. I sent one single text message to her number. All future communication must be directed to my attorney, Mr. Henderson. His office number is 919-555-0123. Do not contact me directly. Then I blocked her number. It felt like cutting off a limb. Painful and shocking, but necessary for survival. I spent the rest of the afternoon gathering the physical evidence. I went to the house when I knew they would be out. Marianne always went to get her hair done on Tuesdays at 1 o'clock, regardless of financial ruin. And Douglas would be at the pub. I entered my own house like a thief. It smelled of Marianne's perfume and lemon pledge. I went straight to the basement. The door was locked, but I had the master key. I opened it. The basement apartment was empty of people, but full of evidence. There was a calendar on the wall with dates marked rent due. There was a ledger on the small table. I opened it. It was in Douglas's handwriting. January, $1,200, paid cash. February, $1,200, paid cash. I took photos of everything. I took the ledger. I went upstairs to the kitchen. I looked for the mail. There, buried in a stack of catalogs, was a letter from Shadow Creek Finance addressed to Brooke Martin. It had been opened. So she had been intercepting the mail, too. That was a federal crime. Interference with correspondence. I bagged it all. As I was leaving the house, my phone buzzed with a text. It wasn't Marianne. It was Douglas. I sat in my car in the driveway, the engine idling, and looked at the message. She is not stopping. She is calling everyone. She is telling them you have gone crazy. She is trying to get Uncle Steve disbarred for breaching privilege. She is looking for the original deed in your room to destroy it. I tried to tell her it is recorded digitally, but she won't listen. She is dangerous right now. Brooke, watch your back. I looked up at the house. I saw the curtains in the living room twitch. Was she there? Had she skipped her hair appointment? A chill went through me. Marianne was not just a desperate debtor anymore. She was a cornered animal who realized the cage door was closing. She was lashing out at everything. the law, the family, the truth. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway. I needed to get these documents to the lawyer. I needed to get the affidavit filed. And I needed to make sure that when the hammer finally fell, I was standing far, far away from the impact zone, because this was not going to end with a quiet eviction. Marianne was going to burn the whole world down before she admitted she was wrong. The war did not happen in a courtroom, at least not at first. It happened on my phone screen, in the digital trenches of the Holt Family Tree group chat. For years, that group chat had been a benign stream of birthday wishes, blurry photos of casseroles, and political memes from Uncle Bob that everyone ignored. But 24 hours after the dinner at the Oak and Vine, it transformed into a weapon. I was sitting in Mr. Henderson's waiting room, clutching a file of evidence. When my phone vibrated, it was a message from Marianne, but she hadn't sent it to me. She had sent it to everyone. 32 people. Please pray for Douglas and me. The message read, "We are heartbroken to share that Brooke is trying to evict us from our family home. We are elderly and have nowhere to go. We do not understand why she is doing this or where this greed is coming from. But we believe she is being manipulated. We just want peace." I stared at the screen, feeling a cold numbness spread through my chest. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She had cast herself as the martyr, the frail elderly mother being victimized by the greedy, ungrateful daughter. She had conveniently left out the 16 years of mortgage payments I had made. She had left out the forgery. She had left out the fact that she had just tried to steal $50,000 of equity from under my nose. The responses started coming in immediately. "Oh my God, Marianne, that is terrible," came a reply from Cousin Sarah in Ohio. "Is this true?" "Brooke, how could you?" asked Aunt Linda. I watched the bubbles of text appear, each one a fresh stab wound. Marianne was controlling the narrative. She was banking on the fact that people are lazy, that they prefer a simple story of bad daughter over the complex reality of financial fraud. But then, a crack appeared in her facade. It came from Uncle Steve. "Marianne," Steve wrote, "if it is your family home, how does Brooke have the power to evict you? Eviction implies she holds the title. Can you clarify who actually owns the property?" Silence. The group chat went dead for 5 minutes. Marianne did not reply. She could not reply without admitting the lie she had told for nearly 2 decades. I did not engage. I did not type a furious defense. I remembered the advice Mr. Henderson had given me over the phone. Do not litigate in the court of public opinion. Litigate in the court of law. I put the phone away and walked into the conference room. Mr. Henderson was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. He had been handling property disputes in Raleigh for 40 years, and he had zero patience for drama. He spread the documents I had brought him across his mahogany desk: the deed, the tax records, the fraudulent HELOC paperwork, and the foreclosure notice from 16 years ago. "It is a mess, Ms. Martin," he said, peering over his spectacles. "But it is a mess we can clean up. The first step is to file an action to quiet title." "Quiet title?" I asked. "It is a lawsuit to establish a party's title to real property against anyone and everyone, and thus quiet any challenges or claims to the title." Henderson explained, "We need to get a court order that states, unequivocally, that you are the sole owner and that the lien placed by Shadow Creek Finance is invalid due to fraud." He tapped the copy of the loan document with the forged signature. "We also need to file a police report regarding this." He said, "Identity theft and forgery are felonies. This gives us leverage. If your mother contests the eviction, she opens herself up to criminal prosecution." I nodded. It felt heavy, the idea of sending my mother to prison. But then I remembered the text message I had received from Haley an hour ago. "Mom, someone just called the housing office at the university. They claimed to be my guardian and tried to cancel my dorm assignment for the fall, saying I could not afford it." My blood had turned to ice. Marianne, she was not just attacking me. She was trying to scorch the earth beneath Haley's feet. She wanted to strip Haley of her independence. to drag her back into the dysfunction so she could control her again. Thankfully, Haley was my daughter. She had anticipated this. She had gone to the registrar's office first thing in the morning and placed a FERPA suppression on her file. No information could be released, and no changes could be made without a specific password that only Haley knew. Marianne had been stonewalled by a clerk who told her, politely but firmly, that she had no authority, but the attempt alone was enough to kill any lingering guilt I had. Marianne was willing to sabotage her granddaughter's education just to win a power struggle. She was dangerous. Do it, I told Henderson. File the report. File the quiet title. Get them out of my house. I spent the rest of the afternoon with a forensic document examiner named Dr. Aris. Henderson had recommended him to authenticate the forgery formally. Dr. Aris placed the fraudulent loan document under a microscope connected to a large monitor. He placed my actual driver's license signature next to it. Look here, he said, pointing to the top of the letter B on the screen. See this microscopic hesitation mark? The ink pools slightly. That happens when the writer stops to look at the model they are copying. A natural signature flows. It has rhythm. This signature stutters. He moved the image to the end of the name, and here, the pressure is uniform. In your real signature, the pressure varies. Heavy on the downstroke, light on the upstroke. This forger pressed the pen down with the same force the entire time. It is a drawing, not a signature. It is a classic simulation. I looked at the jagged, shaky lines that formed my name. It looked like violence. It looked like desperation etched in blue ink. I can testify to this in court, with a high degree of certainty. Doctor, Aris concluded, this was not written by your hand. I left his office feeling a grim sense of validation. I had the science, I had the law, I had the truth, but I still did not have the full story. I still did not understand why now, why $50,000, why the sudden, frantic need to destroy everything. The answer came at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, in the form of a text from my father. Starbucks on 5th, alone, please. I hesitated. Was it a trap? Was Marianne going to be there, ready to cause a scene? But I thought of Douglas's face in the restaurant, the terror in his eyes. He was a weak man, a man who had enabled a monster for 40 years, but he was not the monster himself. I went. I saw him sitting in the back corner of the coffee shop. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low and a windbreaker that looked 2 sizes too big for him. He had lost weight, or maybe he was just shrinking under the pressure. His hands were wrapped around a paper cup of black coffee, and they were shaking so badly the liquid was rippling. I sat down opposite him. I did not buy a drink. I did not take off my coat. Where is she? I asked. At home, he said, his voice raspy. She is calling everyone. She is calling your cousins. She is calling the pastor. She is spinning a web. Brooke, she believes her own lies now. She actually believes you are the villain. I know. I said, I saw the group chat. Douglas winced. I tried to stop her. I told her it would backfire, but she is panicked. She is terrified of losing the house. She should have thought of that before she forged my signature. I said coldly. Douglas looked down at his coffee. He took a long, shuddering breath. It wasn't just spending. Brooke, he whispered. It wasn't just the clothes or the dinners. Then what was it? I asked. Why did she need $50,000 so badly that she committed a felony? Douglas looked around the shop to make sure no one was listening. He leaned in, his eyes watery and red-rimmed. It was an investment, he said. A scam, really. But she thought it was real. Some cryptocurrency scheme she found online. She thought she could turn 10,000 into 100,000. She wanted to. She said she wanted to surprise us. She wanted to pay off the credit cards and buy a vacation home. She wanted to prove she was smart. I stared at him. It was so pathetic, so tragically Marianne. She deemed herself a genius, so she was the perfect mark for a con artist. She lost the initial 10,000. Douglas continued. Then she tried to win it back. She put in more. She used the credit cards. She drained the joint account. By Christmas, we were $40,000 in the hole. And then, The taxman came. The taxman? I asked. Not the IRS, Douglas said. She hadn't paid the income tax on the rental money from the basement. She hadn't declared it. She got a letter. She was scared. She needed cash to pay off the scammers and the debts before everything collapsed. So she stole my identity. I said, she thought she could fix it, Douglas said, a tear sliding down his cheek. She thought if she got the loan, she could put it into one last sure-thing investment and make it all back before the first payment was due. She thought she could pay off the loan and release the lien, and you would never know. It was the logic of a gambling addict. The logic of a desperate narcissist. I leaned back, feeling a mixture of disgust and pity. Dad, I said, that is not just sad. That is criminal. She put my house, my asset, Haley's future, on the roulette wheel. I know. He sobbed. I know. I am so sorry. Brooke, I was too weak to stop her. I looked at him. There was one more piece of the puzzle. The one thing that didn't fit. How did she get it notarized? I asked. I checked the date. I was in Chicago. No legitimate notary would stamp that document without me being present. Douglas went still. He stopped crying. He looked up at me, and the fear in his eyes shifted into something darker. It was the look of a man revealing a body buried in the backyard. She didn't go to a bank. He whispered, Then who is Patricia Vance? I asked. The name on the stamp. Douglas swallowed hard. Patricia Vance isn't a random notary. Brooke, she is an old friend of Marianne's, from way back, from before you were born. So, I said. Patricia used to work in real estate, Douglas said. She lost her license 10 years ago for fraud, but she kept her stamp. She does favors for people, for a fee. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just a desperate act by a mother. This was a conspiracy. Marianne had sought out a known fraudster, a disgraced professional, to help her execute this crime. She had planned it. She had coordinated it. Marianne paid her $500. Douglas confessed. They met at the Waffle House on Route 70. Patricia stamped it right there on the table. She didn't care who signed it. I sat there, processing the level of betrayal. My mother had met a woman in a Waffle House to sell me out for $500. You have to be careful. Brooke, Douglas said, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. Patricia. She knows people, bad people, and Marianne. She told Patricia that you were the problem. She told Patricia that you were trying to cheat her. I stood up. I had heard enough. I felt physically ill. I am going to the police, Dad, I said, and I'm going to tell them everything you just told me. Douglas nodded slowly. He didn't try to stop me. He looked like a man who was ready for the end. Do what you have to do, he said. Just keep Haley safe. Marianne is not herself. She has snapped. She thinks she is fighting for her life, and a cornered animal bites. I walked out of the coffee shop into the bright afternoon sun. But the world felt dark. I realized then that the quiet title action was not enough. The eviction notice was not enough. I wasn't just dealing with a bad tenant. I was dealing with a criminal enterprise operating out of my childhood home. And now that I had exposed them, the machinery of their fraud was turning its gears toward me. I got into my car and locked the doors immediately. I checked the back seat. I was paranoid. Yes, but as I drove away, I checked my rearview mirror. A black sedan pulled out of the parking lot 2 cars behind me. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just traffic. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't just afraid of my mother's words. I was afraid of what she was capable of doing next. She had already tried to kill my credit. She had tried to kill my daughter's future. Now, I wondered if she was willing to kill the witness. The legal system is a slow-moving beast, but when it bites, it does not let go. In the days following my meeting with Douglas, I stopped being a daughter and became a plaintiff. I stopped reacting to Marianne's emotional storms and started building a seawall of paperwork so high and so thick that no amount of tears could breach it. The first step was the bank. I walked into the fraud department of First Citizens with a stack of documents 3 inches thick. I filed a formal affidavit of identity theft. I provided them with the police report number I had generated the day before. I formally requested that the $50,000 line of credit be frozen immediately and that an investigation be opened into the origination of the loan. They told me it would take time, perhaps 30 to 60 days. I told them I did not care how long it took, as long as the record showed that I had contested the debt the moment I discovered it. Simultaneously, Mr. Henderson sent a certified letter to 124 Oak Street. It was a cease and desist order that covered every square inch of the property. It was a legal straitjacket for Mary Ann. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that the occupants were forbidden from entering into any rental agreements, collecting any monies, making any structural changes, or even signing for packages addressed to the owner. The letter made it clear. Mary Ann and Douglas were guests who had overstayed their welcome, and their privileges were revoked. Mary Ann did not take this lying down. If she could not fight me in the courts, because she knew she would lose, she would fight me in the court of public opinion. She decided to turn the family and the community against me. She went on a tour of misery. She started attending every church function, every bingo night, and every distant cousin's potluck dinner. She dressed in drab colors, eschewing her usual bright blazers for cardigans that looked frayed. She walked with a slight limp that she had never had before. She was playing the role of the discarded matriarch, the King Lear of Raleigh, cast out into the storm by a wicked child. I heard about it from my cousin Sarah. Sarah had initially been sympathetic to Mary Ann in the group chat, sending prayer hands emojis when Mary Ann first dropped the bomb. But Sarah was also an accountant, and accountants have a natural aversion to things that do not add up. Sarah called me on a Tuesday evening. "Brooke," she said, sounding hesitant. "I saw your mother at the church bake sale last night." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "What did she say?" "Sarah?" "She was crying near the lemon squares." Sarah said, "She was telling Mrs. Higgins that you were mentally unstable. She said you had a breakdown and were trying to seize the house to pay for, well, she implied drugs or gambling. She was vague, but she made it sound awful. She said she was praying for your soul." I felt a flash of anger, but I pushed it down. It was predictable. "And?" I asked. "Well," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength, "she was passing around a petition, a prayer petition, she called it, but it was basically a list of people agreeing that you should return the deed to her. She asked me to sign it." I waited. I took the pen. Sarah said, "But then I looked at her, and I remembered the tax records you posted in the family group, the ones she tried to get the admin to delete. And I asked her a simple question. I said, 'Mary Ann, if this has been your house for 16 years, why are the property tax bills addressed to Brooke Martin at a P.O. box?'" I smiled. It was the first crack in the dam. "What did she say?" I asked. She froze. Sarah said, "She turned bright red. She started stammering something about a tax loophole in asset management. She said you were just the secretary handling the paperwork. But Brooke, I file taxes for a living. You do not put a secretary's name on a deed to save money. That is not how the law works." Sarah paused. I put the pen down. "Brooke, I did not sign it. And I saw Mrs. Higgins put her pen down. 2. People are starting to wonder. The story keeps changing. First you are ungrateful. Then you are a thief. Then you are crazy. But the paperwork? The paperwork stays the same." That conversation was the fuel I needed. I realized that while Mary Ann was playing checkers, jumping around and making noise, I was playing chess. And I was about to bring a new piece onto the board. I contacted a company called Harborgate Property Services. They were a high-end property management firm in the area. I told them I was the owner of a single-family home in a desirable neighborhood and that I was considering converting it into a rental investment property after a pending eviction was completed. I asked them to conduct a site survey and provide a rental appraisal. I scheduled the appointment for a time when I knew Mary Ann would be home. I wanted her to see the future. I met the Harborgate representative, a sharp man named Mr. Davis, on the front lawn. I had my deed in hand, just in case. Mr. Davis walked around the exterior, taking notes on an iPad. He checked the siding, the roof, the landscaping. Then we walked up to the front door. I used my key. The door swung open. Marianne was in the living room, watching television. She jumped up when she saw us, clutching her robe tight. "Who is this?" she demanded, her eyes darting from me to Mr. Davis. "What are you doing? You cannot bring strangers in here." "Mom, this is Mr. Davis from Harborgate," I said calmly. "He is here to appraise the rental value of the property." Marianne's face went purple. "Get out!" she screamed at Mr. Davis. "Get out of my house. I will call the police." Mr. Davis looked at me, unfazed. He had dealt with difficult tenants before. "Ms. Martin?" he asked. "Please proceed." "Mr. Davis," I said, "you have the owner's permission." I turned to Marianne. "You do not own this house. Mom, you are an occupant, and as the owner, I have the right to inspect the premises and appraise its value. You can either sit down and watch TV, or you can leave, but you will not interfere." Marianne stood there, trembling with impotent rage. She wanted to physically throw him out. I could see it in her hands, curling into claws, but she knew that if she touched him, I would call the sheriff. She was trapped by the reality she had tried so hard to deny. She sank back onto the sofa, seething, as Mr. Davis measured the living room, checked the windows, and inspected the kitchen. He walked through her sanctuary, judging it with a cold, commercial eye. When he was finished, we stood in the foyer. "It is a solid property, Ms. Martin," Mr. Davis said, loud enough for Marianne to hear, "with the basement unit, which I see is fully equipped, and the main house. You are looking at a potential monthly income of $4,500, maybe more if you update the kitchen." $4,500. I saw Marianne flinch. That was more than double what she had claimed the mortgage was. It was a number that highlighted just how much equity she had been sitting on, and how much she had taken for granted. "Thank you, Mr. Davis," I said. "I will be in touch once the unit is vacant." I left the house without saying a word to her. I didn't need to. The invasion of the real world into her fantasy bubble was punishment enough. But while I was securing the property, I had to secure my daughter. Haley moved out 3 days later. It was earlier than her dormitory contract officially started, but the university housing office, after hearing a sanitized version of the situation, a volatile family dispute, had granted her an emergency early move-in. We spent a Saturday packing her things. The house was quiet. Douglas was hiding in the garage, and Marianne had locked herself in the master bedroom, refusing to come out. It was a ghostly silence. As we taped up the last box of books, Haley looked around her childhood bedroom. The walls were still painted a soft lavender, covered in posters of bands and science diagrams. "It feels weird," Haley said, "like I am escaping." "You are," I said, handing her a roll of tape. "You are escaping the crossfire." Haley looked at me. She looked older than 22. The last week had aged her, stripped away the last layers of childhood innocence. "I am not just leaving. Mom," she said, "I am going to help you finish this." She pulled a folder out of her backpack. "I went through the old family calendars," she said, "the ones Grandma keeps in the pantry. She never throws them away. She thinks they are historical documents." I frowned. "What did you find?" "I cross-referenced them with the loans she claimed to have given you over the years." Haley said, "And I cross-referenced them with the dates on that timeline you are building." She opened the folder. Inside was a spreadsheet. My daughter, the scientist, had applied her data analysis skills to our family trauma. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a date in 2015. "Grandma told Aunt Linda that she paid for my braces because you were broke. She said she wrote a check for $5,000. I nodded. I remembered that lie. It had humiliated me at Christmas that year. "Well," Haley said, "on that exact date, according to her own calendar, she was in Las Vegas with Grandpa. And according to the bank statements you pulled, there was no check, but there was a withdrawal from your account to Dr. Miller's Orthodontics for $5,200. She flipped the page. And here, 2018, the roof repair. She told everyone she dipped into her retirement savings, But her calendar shows she was at a casino in Atlantic City that weekend, and your bank statement shows a transfer to Raleigh Roofing for $12,000. I looked at the data. It was beautiful. It was a systematic dismantling of every lie Marianne had ever told. "We can use this," I said, feeling a surge of pride. This establishes a pattern of deception. It proves that her current claims about the house are just the latest in a long line of fabrications. Haley smiled. A fierce, determined smile. She messed with the wrong women. Mom. With Haley safe in her dorm and the timeline taking shape, Mr. Henderson made the next move. He contacted Marianne's attorney, a court-appointed lawyer she had scrambled to find because no reputable firm would take her case on contingency, and arranged for mediation. In North Carolina, mediation is often mandatory before a civil case goes to trial. It is an attempt to settle things out of court. Marianne agreed immediately. Henderson told me she sounded eager. She thinks she can charm the mediator. Henderson warned me. She thinks if she can just get in a room and cry and talk about family values, she can guilt you into dropping the eviction. She sees this as a performance opportunity. Let her perform. I said, I will bring the reviews. I spent the night before the mediation preparing the final. Fatal blow. I had received the subpoenaed records from the bank regarding the fraudulent loan. The package had arrived via secure courier. I sat at my desk in the hotel room. I was still staying at the hotel, refusing to sleep under the same roof as the woman who had robbed me, and opened the envelope. It contained the digital log of the transaction. Date of signing, January 4th, 2026. Time, 2:15 in the afternoon. Location, geotagged to a Waffle House on Route 70. Witnesses, Patricia Vance, notary, and an unidentified male. I pulled up my own records. Date, January 4th, 2026. Time, 2:15 in the afternoon. Location, the Palmer House Hilton, Chicago, Illinois. I had a selfie. It was a silly photo I had taken with a colleague. Sarah, in the lobby of the hotel, in the background. A digital clock on the wall clearly read 2:15 p.m., and the metadata on the photo confirmed the location coordinates. Marianne had not just forged a signature, she had forged a physical impossibility. She had placed me in a Waffle House in North Carolina at the exact second I was standing in a hotel lobby in Chicago, 800 miles away. And the best part? She had used a notary who was already on a watch list. Mr. Henderson had done some digging on Patricia Vance. It turned out that Mrs. Vance had been flagged for suspicious activity 3 times in the last year. By connecting Marianne to Patricia, I wasn't just proving a one-time fraud. I was handing the district attorney a conspiracy ring on a silver platter. I laid the photos side by side. The Waffle House log, the Chicago selfie. It was checkmate. Marianne had walked into this thinking it was a family squabble. She thought it was about feelings, about who loved whom more, about who was ungrateful. She thought she could cry her way out of it because that had worked for her entire life. She did not realize that we were not arguing about feelings anymore. We were arguing about physics. We were arguing about the fact that a human being cannot be in 2 places at once. I packed the documents into my briefcase, the same briefcase I had opened at the dinner table. It felt heavier now, loaded with the weight of the end. I looked at myself in the mirror. I did not look like the tired, beaten-down daughter who had walked into the Oak and Vine a week ago. I looked like a CEO. I looked like a woman who owned her own life. I texted Haley. It is done. We have the proof. Tomorrow. We end it. Haley texted back immediately. Give her hell. Mom. I went to sleep that night and slept soundly for the first time in 16 years. I knew that tomorrow, the chess match would end. I knew that Marianne would walk into that mediation room thinking she was the queen, not realizing that I had already captured the board. All I had to do was wait for her to make one final, arrogant move, and then I would pull the string that would bring her entire world crashing down. The mediation center was located in a sterile, beige office park on the outskirts of Raleigh, the kind of place designed to suck the emotion out of a room. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that felt like a meat locker, and the fluorescent lights hummed with a low, headache-inducing frequency. It was a place where marriages went to die and business partnerships were dissolved. Today, it was where my family would finally shatter. I sat on one side of the long, oval table, flanked by Mr. Henderson and Haley. Across from us sat Marianne and Douglas, looking small and huddled together, their court-appointed lawyer, a harried-looking man named Mr. Finch, who clearly had not had enough time to review the mountain of evidence we had filed, was shuffling papers nervously. Marianne had dressed for the occasion. Gone were the power suits and the expensive jewelry. She was wearing a faded gray cardigan that I recognized from 10 years ago, and she had forgone her usual makeup. She looked frail. She looked tragic. She looked like a sweet grandmother who was being persecuted by a ruthless corporate machine. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award, and if I had not known her better, I might have felt sorry for her. The mediator, a retired judge named Mrs. Gable, cleared her throat. She had kind eyes but a mouth set in a firm line. She had seen it all before. "We are here to attempt to resolve the dispute regarding the property at 124 Oak Street," Mrs. Gable said. "The goal is to find a solution that avoids a costly trial. Mrs. Holt, since you are the one contesting the eviction, would you like to start?" Marianne nodded slowly, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling just enough to be audible. "I just want to say that this is all a terrible misunderstanding. My daughter, she is confused. We have lived in that house for 40 years. It is our home. We raised her there." She reached into her oversized handbag and pulled out the crumpled piece of stationery, the fake buyback agreement she had tried to show me at the restaurant. "I found the contract," she said, sliding it across the table with a shaking hand. "Brooke signed this. She promised to give the house back. She knows she did." Mr. Henderson did not even touch the paper. He just looked at it over the rim of his glasses. "We have already established that this document is a forgery." "Mrs. Holt," Henderson said, his voice dry and bored. "The signature does not match. The date places my client in a hospital bed on an IV drip. If you try to enter this into evidence in a court of law, we will move for sanctions." Marianne gasped, looking at the mediator. "He is calling me a liar," she cried. "I am 70 years old. Why would I lie?" "Brooke?" Mrs. Gable asked, turning to me. I sat up straight. I did not look at Marianne. I looked at the mediator. "I am not here to debate emotions." "Mrs. Gable," I said, "I am here to discuss facts. I am the legal owner of the property. I have the deed. I have 16 years of tax records. I have 16 years of mortgage payments. My parents have been living there as tenants at will. They have violated that tenancy by subletting the basement illegally, damaging the property, and failing to pay the agreed-upon utilities." I paused, letting the words land. "And now, they are refusing to vacate. That is the only issue on the table." Mr. Finch, Marianne's lawyer, leaned forward. "My clients contend that there was a verbal agreement for a life estate," he said weakly. "They believe they have a right to remain in the home until death. There is no written record of a life estate." Henderson countered. "And in North Carolina, real estate transactions must be in writing to be enforceable. The statute of frauds is quite clear." Marianne slammed her hand on the table. It was a flash of the real Marianne, breaking through the frail grandmother act. "I do not care about your statutes," she snapped. "It is my house. I picked out the curtains. I planted the roses." Mrs. Gable held up a hand. "Let us lower the volume, please, Mr." Henderson opened his briefcase. It was time to pivot. We had let them think this was just about the eviction. Now, we were going to drop the anvil. "We can discuss the eviction timeline," Henderson said. "But first, we need to address a more pressing matter, a matter that makes any continued residency impossible." He pulled out the Shadow Creek Finance loan documents, the $50,000 lien, the forged signature. "My client discovered last week that a home equity line of credit was taken out against the property on January 4th of this year. Henderson said, "The loan amount is $50,000. The borrower is listed as Brooke Martin." He slid the paper toward Marianne. "Mrs. Holt, do you know anything about this?" Marianne went still. Her eyes darted to the paper, then to Douglas, then to the wall. I do not know what you are talking about," she said. Henderson nodded. "That is strange, because the funds were wired to an account at Woodforest National Bank, an account that lists you and Douglas Holt as the primary holders." Marianne licked her lips. Her face was pale. "Well," she said, her voice higher now, maybe Brooke sent us the money. Maybe she took out the loan and gave it to us. She owes us. After all," I spoke up then, "I did not take out the loan. Mom," I said, "I was in Chicago on January 4th. Marianne scoffed. "You were not in Chicago. You are always lying about where you are. Mr. Henderson pulled out the second piece of evidence, the notarized log from the loan officer. The loan was notarized in person. "In Raleigh," Henderson said, "by a notary public." He paused. He did not say the name. He just waited. Marianne looked trapped. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy. She felt the pressure of the lie collapsing, and she tried to shore it up with a detail that she thought would help her validity. "Well," she said, shifting in her seat, "the notary. She is a professional. She would not make a mistake. Patricia is very thorough." The room went dead silent. "Mr.?" Henderson smiled. It was a shark's smile. "Patricia?" he asked softly. Marianne blinked. She realized too late what she had done. I assume her name is Patricia," she stammered. "It says it on the stamp. Does it not?" Henderson shook his head. "I have not shown you the signature page, Mrs. Holt," he said. "I have only shown you the loan amount. The name of the notary is on the last page, which is currently face down on this table." He flipped the document over. "Patricia Vance." Henderson read, "You knew the name of the notary before I showed it to you. How is that possible, Mrs. Holt, if you had nothing to do with this loan?" Marianne opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Mr. Finch, begging him to save her. Mr. Finch looked at the document, then at his client, and closed his folder. He knew when he was beaten. He leaned back, distancing himself from the radioactive fallout occurring next to him. Henderson pressed the advantage. "We have a sworn affidavit from a handwriting expert. Dr. Aris," he continued, sliding another report across the table. "He has concluded that the signature on this loan is a simulation. It is a forgery, and we have a statement from the bank's fraud department confirming that they are opening a criminal investigation into the origination of these funds." Marianne began to hyperventilate. The frail old lady act was dissolving into genuine terror. "It was an accident," she shrieked. "It was supposed to be a surprise. I was going to pay it back. Admission." Henderson whispered to the court reporter who was transcribing the session. Douglas, who had been staring at his hands for the entire hour, suddenly made a sound. It was a low groan, like a piece of timber snapping under too much weight. "Douglas?" Marianne hissed. "Say something. Tell them." Douglas looked up. His eyes were red, and his face was gray with exhaustion. He looked at me, then at Marianne. "I told you to stop," he said. His voice was quiet, but in the acoustically dampened room, it sounded like a gunshot. Marianne froze. "What did you say?" "I told you to stop," Douglas repeated. Louder this time. "I told you Brooke would find out. I told you we could not keep doing this." He turned to the mediator. "She did it." Douglas said. He pointed a shaking finger at his wife of 45 years. "She found Patricia. She paid her $500 at the Waffle House. She practiced Brooke's signature for 3 days on the kitchen table. I watched her do it." "Douglas!" Marianne screamed. "You traitor! You spineless coward! I told you to stop!" Douglas roared, slamming his fist on the table. "For 16 years, I have lived with this knot in my stomach. Watching you lie to everyone. Watching you treat Brooke like garbage while she paid for the roof over our heads. I am tired. Marianne, I am so tired of the lies. He put his head in his hands and began to weep. It was a messy, ugly sound. The room was stunned. The facade of the happy, united Holt family had not just cracked, it had exploded. Marianne stared at her husband with pure hatred. She had lost her shield. She had lost her accomplice. She turned her venom on the only target left. She looked at Haley. Haley was sitting next to me, her face pale but composed. She was watching the destruction of her grandparents with a sadness that went bone deep. You, Marianne spat. This is your fault. You put ideas in her head. You turned her against me. Haley shook her head. No, Grandma. You did this to yourself. You ungrateful little brat. Marianne sneered. Who do you think you are? You think you are so special with your honors degree? You think you did that on your own? You are nothing without the Holt name. You are smart because I am smart. You succeeded because I pushed you. Haley looked her grandmother in the eye. You did not push me. Grandma, Haley said, you pressured me. You told me I had to be perfect to make up for Mom. You told me I had to be rich so I wouldn't end up like her. Haley reached out and took my hand. But you were wrong. She continued. Mom is not a failure. Mom is the reason I have a degree. She is the reason I have a car. She is the reason I have a future. I did not succeed because of your blood. Grandma, I succeeded because of her work. I am my mother's daughter, not yours. Marianne recoiled, as if she had been physically struck. That was the one thing she could not handle. Irrelevance. She wanted to be the source of all good things. Hearing Haley credit me, the scapegoat, was the ultimate injury. Mrs. Gable, the mediator, stood up. She looked shaken. I think we are done here, she said firmly. There is clearly no possibility of mediation. This matter involves allegations of criminal conduct that are beyond the scope of this session. She looked at Marianne. Mrs. Holt, I am terminating this mediation. Mr. Henderson, you may proceed with your court filing. Marianne stood up, her legs shaking. You cannot do this, she screamed. I will not leave my house. I will burn it down before I let her have it. That is a threat of arson on the record, Henderson noted calmly. Mrs. Gable looked at Marianne with a gaze of steel. Mrs. Holt, I am issuing a preliminary recommendation for a temporary restraining order regarding the property assets. You are hereby instructed to cease all financial activity related to the home. You are not to touch the fixtures, the appliances, or the structure. If you damage one single brick of that house, you will be held in contempt of court. Do you understand? Marianne did not answer. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room, leaving Douglas weeping at the table. We walked out of the mediation center into the blinding afternoon sun. It was over, but it wasn't finished. The legal wheels were turning. But the emotional wreckage was still smoking. We need to go to the house. I told Henderson. Why? He asked. Because she threatened to burn it down. I said, and because Douglas just admitted she has been practicing forgery at the kitchen table. I need to secure the premises before she destroys the evidence. Henderson nodded. I will call the sheriff to meet you there for a civil standby. Do not go in alone. I drove to 124 Oak Street with Haley in the passenger seat. We did not speak. We were both processing the image of Douglas breaking down. It was a tragedy, but it was a necessary one. When we arrived, the sheriff's deputy was already there, leaning against his cruiser. Marianne's car was in the driveway, but the house was quiet. We went inside. The air in the house felt stagnant, heavy with the weight of 40 years of secrets. Marianne was nowhere to be seen. The deputy checked the rooms. She is in the bedroom, locked in. He told me. She says she is sick. I told her to stay put. I nodded. I went to the kitchen. I needed to see the scene of the crime. The kitchen table, the famous oak table where we had eaten so many Thanksgiving dinners, where I had been humiliated just a week ago, was covered in clutter, but as I moved a stack of old magazines, I saw something. It was a notepad, a standard, yellow legal pad. I looked closer. The top page had been torn off, but the impression remained on the page underneath. I grabbed a pencil from the jar and lightly shaded over the impression, a trick I had learned from a detective novel. The words appeared in ghost-like gray lead. Brooke Martin, Brooke Martin, Brooke Martin. It was my signature. Practiced over and over again, the loops, the slant, the pressure. It was the physical proof of Douglas's confession. I tore the page off and put it in an evidence bag. "Mom!" Haley called out from the living room. Her voice sounded strange. "Come here." I walked into the living room. Haley was standing by the closet under the stairs. The Harry Potter closet, we used to call it. The door was open. Marianne had apparently been trying to purge things. There were garbage bags filled with old clothes and papers, but one box had tipped over. It was an old cardboard box, smelling of mildew. It was labeled taxes. Do not touch in Marianne's handwriting. Haley was holding a bundle of letters tied with a rubber band. "What is that?" I asked. "I think she forgot she had these," Haley said. "Or maybe she kept them as trophies." She handed me the bundle. The top letter was an envelope addressed to me, unopened. The postmark was from 14 years ago. The return address was the Wake County Tax Office. It was a delinquent tax notice I had never received. I opened the next one. It was a letter from me. My handwriting. Dated 12 years ago. "Dear Mom and Dad." The letter read, "I know things are tight, but please let me know if the furnace repair guy comes on Tuesday. As the landlord, I need to authorize the payment. Love, Brooke." I stared at the letter. I remembered writing it. I remembered mailing it from my apartment in Chicago when I was away for training. Marianne had kept it. She had opened it, read it, and filed it away in a box labeled taxes. But it was the document at the bottom of the box that made the room spin. It was a carbon copy of a letter Marianne had written to her sister, Aunt Linda, dated 10 years ago. Marianne never used email for serious things. She liked to type letters on her typewriter. I pulled it out and read the first paragraph. "Dear Linda, I know you keep asking why we don't sell the house and move to Florida. The truth is, we can't. We sold it to Brooke years ago to pay off the debts. She owns it. She lets us stay here. But honestly, it is humiliating. I have to ask her for money for repairs. I hate it. But don't tell anyone. As far as the family knows, it is still ours. If anyone found out I was living in my daughter's house like a charity case, I would die of shame." I felt a cold chill run through my body. She knew, all this time. She wasn't confused. She wasn't senile. She wasn't operating under a misunderstanding or a verbal agreement for a life estate. She knew exactly who owned the house. She had admitted it in writing 10 years ago. She had built the entire lie not out of confusion, but out of pure, calculated vanity. She would rather commit fraud, steal from her daughter, and destroy her granddaughter's future than admit to her sister that she was no longer the queen of the castle. This letter destroyed her entire defense. It proved malice. It proved intent. I looked at Haley. She knew. I whispered. She knew the whole time. Haley looked at the letter, then at the bedroom door where Marianne was hiding. "Then let's finish it," Haley said. I put the letter in the evidence bag. The chess match was over. I had just found the king. The hearing took place in Courtroom 4 of the Wake County Justice Center. It was a windowless room with acoustic tiles on the ceiling that seemed to absorb not just sound, but hope. Unlike the mediation room, which had been designed to facilitate compromise, this room was designed for judgment. There was a raised dais for the judge, a witness stand, and 2 tables separated by an aisle that felt a mile wide. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Mr. Henderson. My briefcase was open. The evidence was organized into neat, labeled stacks, Exhibit A through Exhibit Z. It was the physical manifestation of 16 years of silence, and today, it was going to speak louder than my mother ever could. Marianne sat at the defendant's table. She was alone. Douglas had refused to come. He had told her that morning that he could not watch her lie to a judge, so Marianne sat there, clutching her handbag, looking small and brittle. Her court-appointed lawyer, Mr. Finch, looked like he would rather be anywhere else on earth. He knew what was coming. We had disclosed the new evidence, the taxes box letter, and the Waffle House forgery log. To him, 24 hours ago. He had likely advised her to settle, to plead, to give up, but Marianne Holt did not know how to give up. She only knew how to double down. The bailiff announced the arrival of the Honorable Judge Vance. We stood, the judge, a woman with graying hair and a face that brooked no nonsense, took her seat and reviewed the file. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at us. We are here for a hearing on the matter of Martin versus Holt, regarding the quiet title action and ejectment for the property at 124 Oak Street. Judge Vance said, "Let us proceed. Mr." Henderson stood up. He did not waste time with theatrical opening statements. He simply laid out the timeline. He walked the judge through the deed transfer in 2010. He presented the 16 years of mortgage payments, property tax receipts, and insurance premiums, all paid by me. Then, he moved to the kill shot. "Your Honor," he said, his voice level, "the defendant claims she has a life estate or a verbal agreement to remain in the property. However, we have evidence that proves not only that no such agreement exists, but that the defendant has been fully aware of the plaintiff's sole ownership for over a decade and has actively concealed it to maintain a social facade." He handed the bailiff the letter we had found in the closet. The letter Marianne had written to Aunt Linda 10 years ago. The judge read it. The silence in the room was absolute. I watched Judge Vance's eyes move across the page. I saw her eyebrows lift slightly when she reached the part where Marianne admitted to living in my daughter's house like a charity case. Judge Vance looked up at Marianne. "Mrs. Holt, did you write this letter?" Marianne stood up. She was trembling. I was upset that day." She stammered. "I was just venting." "It does not mean anything. It means you knew," the judge said, her voice sharp. "It means that for 10 years, you have acknowledged that the property belongs to your daughter, despite your claims in this court that you were confused or misled." Mr. Henderson did not let up. He moved immediately to the Shadow Creek finance loan. He presented the affidavit from the forensic document examiner. He presented the digital log from the Waffle House. And then, he presented the geotagged photo of me in Chicago. "Your Honor," Henderson said, "the defendant did not just refuse to vacate. She attempted to strip $50,000 of equity from the home by forging the plaintiff's signature on a high-interest loan. She utilized a notary who has since been reported to the Secretary of State for fraud. This is not a tenancy dispute. This is a criminal enterprise operating under the guise of family." Marianne let out a wail. It was the sound of a cornered animal. "I did it for the family," she screamed, interrupting Mr. Henderson. "I needed the money to save us. I raised her. I fed her. I gave her life. How dare she sit there and treat me like a criminal? I am her mother." She turned to look at me, her eyes wild. "You owe me," she shouted. "You owe me everything. You would be nothing without me." "Mr. Finch tried to grab her arm to silence her, but she shook him off. "I have rights," she yelled. "I have the right to live in the home I built." Judge Vance banged her gavel. It was a singular thunderous crack that stopped Marianne mid-sentence. "Mrs. Holt, sit down," the judge commanded. Marianne froze. She looked at the judge, then slowly sank back into her chair. The judge looked at her with an expression that was not angry, but deeply disappointed. "Mrs. Holt," the judge said, "giving birth to a child does not give you the right to steal their identity. Raising a daughter does not entitle you to commit felony forgery against her property." The judge shuffled the papers into a neat stack. "Ownership is ownership," Judge Vance stated firmly. "The law is not interested in your family dynamics or your feelings of entitlement. The law is interested in the deed, and the deed belongs to Brooke Martin." She looked at the clerk. "I am granting the plaintiff's motion for quiet title. The court finds that Brooke Martin is the sole fee simple owner of the property. The lien recorded by Shadow Creek Finance is hereby declared invalid due to fraud, and I am referring the matter of the forgery to the district attorney's office for investigation." Marianne gasped, clutching her chest. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I am granting the order of ejectment. Mrs. Holt, You have 7 days to vacate the premises. You are to remove your personal effects only. You are not to remove any fixtures, appliances, or furniture that were not purchased by you personally. A sheriff's deputy will supervise your move out to ensure compliance. 7 days? Marianne whispered. But where will I go? That is not the court's concern. Judge Vance said, You have had 16 years of rent-free living to save for this day. Court is adjourned. The gavel banged again. It was over. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs since I was 26 years old. I looked at Henderson. He nodded at me. A small, professional smile on his face. We had won. Not a partial victory, a total victory. We walked out of the courtroom. Marianne was still sitting at the table, staring blankly at the wall. Mr. Finch was packing his briefcase with the speed of a man fleeing a sinking ship. In the hallway, I found Douglas waiting on a bench. He looked terrible. He was wearing the same clothes he had worn yesterday, and his eyes were bloodshot. When he saw me, he stood up slowly. Did she lose? He asked. I nodded. She has 7 days. Dad. Douglas closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the wall. I am sorry. Brooke, he whispered, I am so sorry. I looked at him. I felt a pang of sadness. But it was not the crippling guilt I used to feel. It was just a factual acknowledgement that he was a weak man who had made bad choices. I have a proposition for you. Dad, I said. He opened his eyes. I am not going to let you be homeless. I said, I have already spoken to a leasing agent at the Meadows. It is a senior living complex about 20 minutes from here. It is clean, it is safe, and it is affordable. Douglas stared at me. You would do that? After everything? I nodded. I will pay the deposit and the first 6 months of rent, but there is a condition. He waited. You go alone, I said. Douglas flinched. Marianne cannot live there, I said firmly. The lease will be in your name only. If you let her move in, if you let her stay for even one night, I will stop the payments immediately. You have to choose. Dad, you can have a roof over your head and a relationship with your daughter and granddaughter, or you can go down with her ship, but you cannot do both. Douglas looked at the courtroom doors. He knew what was waiting for him on the other side. He knew that if he stayed with Marianne, he would spend the rest of his life being blamed for this loss. He would be her punching bag until the day he died. He looked back at me. I saw a flicker of something that looked like resolve. The Meadows? He asked. It has a golf course, I said. A small one. Douglas nodded slowly. He took a deep breath. Okay, he said. Okay, I will go. He did not wait for Marianne to come out. He turned and walked toward the exit, his step slightly lighter than it had been in years. He was escaping. The next 7 days were a blur of activity. True to the judge's order, a sheriff's deputy stood in the hallway of 124 Oak Street while Marianne packed. The family reaction was swift and brutal. Once the court ruling became public record, and once Uncle Steve shared the details of the forgery with the extended family, Marianne's support system evaporated. The aunts and cousins who had signed her prayer petition suddenly stopped answering her calls. They realized they had been defending a criminal. They realized they had been played. Marianne left on a rainy Tuesday. She had no one to help her but a hired moving crew. She tried to make a scene as she walked out the front door, shouting at the neighbors that she was being thrown to the wolves, but nobody came out to comfort her. The neighbors had seen the police cars. They knew the truth. She got into a taxi, refusing to tell anyone where she was going. I later learned she had rented a small room in a boarding house 3 towns over, using the last of her Social Security check. When the taxi pulled away, silence fell over the house. It was a different kind of silence than before. It wasn't the silence of secrets. It was the clean, echoing silence of potential. Haley and I stood in the living room. It was empty. The heavy, dated furniture Marianne had loved was gone. The curtains were down, letting in streams of afternoon light that illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. It looks bigger, Haley said, her voice echoing slightly. It is bigger, I said. Because it is finally ours. I did not sell the house. I could not bring myself to let it go. Not after fighting so hard for it. Instead, I signed the contract with Harborgate Property Services. They brought in a contractor the very next day. We tore up the old carpets. We painted the walls a crisp, modern white. We ripped out the kitchen that Marianne had presided over like a tyrant and installed sleek quartz countertops and open shelving. We turned the basement, the scene of the crime, into a legitimate, code-compliant luxury apartment. The rental income was projected to be $4,500 a month. After the mortgage and expenses, that left a profit of nearly $2,000. I opened a new savings account in Haley's name, the Freedom Fund. I called it. It was money that would ensure she never, ever had to depend on anyone else for her survival. 2 months later, on a warm evening in May, Haley and I sat on the floor of the empty living room. The renovation was done. The new tenants, a nice young family of doctors, were moving in the next day. We had ordered a pizza and a bottle of cheap champagne. It was the graduation party we never got to finish. To Brooke Martin, Haley said, raising her plastic cup. The homeowner, the landlord, the badass. I laughed, clinking my cup against hers. To Haley Martin, I said, the graduate, the truth teller, the future. We drank. The house felt warm. It felt safe. For the first time in 16 years. I did not feel like a guest in my own life. I felt like the architect. Then, the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, demanding sound. Ding dong. Haley froze. She looked at me. "Who is that?" she whispered. I checked my watch. It was 8 o'clock at night. The tenants weren't due until morning. I stood up and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. It was Marianne. She looked older. Her hair was unkempt, and she was wearing a coat that looked too heavy for the weather. She was standing on the porch, staring at the door. She reached out and rang the bell again. Ding dong. She did not use a key. She could not use a key. I had changed the locks the minute she left. I felt a momentary tug of instinct, the old instinct to open the door, to fix it, to help her. But then I looked back at Haley. I looked at the clean white walls. I looked at the peace we had built. I unlocked the door and opened it. But I blocked the threshold with my body. Marianne looked up. Her eyes lit up with a flash of hope. "Brooke," she said, her voice cracking. "It is freezing out here. Can I come in? I missed the house. I just wanted to see it one last time." She took a step forward, expecting me to move, expecting me to yield. I did not move. No. "Mom," I said. Marianne stopped. She looked shocked. "What?" "It is just for a minute. I am your mother." I looked at her. I saw the woman who had forged my name, the woman who had tried to ruin my reputation, the woman who had stolen from her own granddaughter. "You are not coming in," I said calmly. "This is not your home. It never was, and you lost the privilege of being a guest when you tried to steal it." Marianne's face crumbled. She started to cry. The old weapon she had used for 40 years. "Brooke, please," she sobbed. "I am lonely. Douglas won't talk to me. The family won't talk to me. I have nowhere to go." I looked at her without anger, without hate, but with total clarity. "That is the consequence of your actions." I said, "I cannot fix that for you." I reached for the door handle. "Please leave," I said, "or I will call the police for trespassing." I did not wait for her answer. I did not wait for the curse or the plea. I closed the door. Click. I turned the deadbolt. Thud. The sound was final. It was the sound of a book closing. I walked back into the living room where my daughter was waiting. I sat down on the floor and picked up my champagne. "Who was it?" Haley asked. "Nobody," I said, smiling. "Just the past." I took a sip of champagne. It tasted like victory. The house was silent, safe, and finally, truly mine. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a long journey, but I hope you found the ending as satisfying as I did. I would love to know where you are listening from right now. Are you in your car, at work, or maybe relaxing at home? Please leave a comment down below and tell me your location and what you thought of Brooke's decision. And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Lucy Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people. Your support means the world to us.